Phileas Flitwick, Charm's professor and dean of Ravenclaw, was as much admired for his wisdom as he was liked for his good humor. Gentle and not overly strict, he was one of the more popular teachers among the younger students. Because he was unusually small, just over a meter tall, he always stood on a stack of thick books to reach the podium. Today, the books sagged slightly under his weight, and the gilded titles on their spines caught the dim classroom light. Small as he was, Flitwick still filled the room with presence. For the first charms lesson of the new term, I had originally planned to teach you the general counterspell, he began. He paused, letting his gaze run over the room. When it passed Harry and the boy beside him, Sherlock, it softened like a breeze on a spring pond. Then, in that crisp, decisive voice, he added, "But now I've changed my mind." A ripple of whispers ran through the class. Harry glanced at Sherlock. "Sherlock," he started, meaning to ask whether Sherlock knew what had prompted the change. Sherlock didn't need to be asked. Without looking up, he said, "Professor Flitwick spoke with Professor Lockhart just before coming in." Harry blinked, about to interrupt, when Hermione, beside him, jumped in. "You saw Lockhart? Where is he? Why didn't I notice?" "I didn't see Lockhart," Sherlock replied. "But it was obvious. There's a strong scent of perfume on Professor Flitwick. Rose and lavender with a note of lily of the valley. That's Lockhart's." The skin around Flitwick's eyes is slightly reddened, and there's a look of worry still in his expression. He's been talking about something upsetting. Also, the left cuff of his robe shows several odd creases, signs someone pulled at it. Put that together with what happened in Defense Against the Dark Arts, and it's simple. He and Lockhart had a frank conversation before this class, compared notes, and Flitwick altered his plan because of it. Harry, Hermione, and Ron exchanged familiar looks, that same mix of exasperation and admiration they always wore when Sherlock laid out a deduction. Enlightenment, they thought, of course. Flitwick cleared his throat. "I have already heard what occurred in your Defense Against the Dark Arts lesson," he said, and now every ear in Charms pricked up. Charms was one of the more enjoyable classes, and mentioning the popular defense class guaranteed full attention. "For you, it's something to be grateful for. Hogwarts has finally employed a competent Defense Against the Dark Arts professor." He allowed a small, complicated smile. He admitted to himself he had been baffled by Dumbledore's appointment of Lockhart, and he had low opinion of Lockhart's boasting. He had vivid memories of Lockhart's past in Ravenclaw. He had not expected Lockhart to stage a genuine comeback. From his first second-year lesson, Lockhart's actual teaching had impressed, flaws and all, and by now his performance had exceeded many expectations. In the weeks since, Lockhart had become more remarkable still, if one ignored his infuriating questionnaires and endless self-promotion. Even a duelist of Flitwick's caliber had to acknowledge Dumbledore had surprised those who doubted him. But Flitwick's voice tightened. "A mere group of Cornish pixies scattering the class is a bit unacceptable. Professor Lockhart came to me a moment ago and questioned my methods." At the name Lockhart, there was a hint of displeasure in Flitwick's face. If anyone else had offered teaching suggestions, even a student, he might not have minded. That it was Lockhart made it sting, and yet he had to admit Lockhart had a point. He breathed out, then announced, "Since that is so, today I will teach you the freezing charm." The class erupted into cheers. Everyone still saw the scene from Defense Against the Dark Arts, a cluster of pixies sent tumbling while Lockhart repeatedly cast the freezing charm. Nearly every student who had watched wanted to be able to do the same. They also liked that Flitwick had taken Lockhart's suggestion so quickly. Flitwick smiled at their enthusiasm and began the theory. The freezing charm is an offensive spell. As the name suggests, when it lands, it stops a person or object from moving, as if frozen. You all saw its effect in Defense Against the Dark Arts. Now, learn the incantation with me. Immobulus. Compared to the three-word levitation charm, Wingardium Leviosa, Immobulus was simple in form, but its nature was different. An offensive charm required steadier mental control. The recent defense class had impressed upon the students just how valuable this spell could be, so concentrating their minds wasn't the issue. Once Flitwick finished the theory, it was time for practice. "Neville's Trevor, Accio," Flitwick called. Neville had barely registered before his toad shot through the air toward the professor, just as it had when Flitwick taught levitation last term. Flitwick followed with the charm. Immobulus! The toad stiffened mid-flight like a frame stopped in a motion picture and dropped neatly to the floor. Watch my wrist carefully, Flitwick instructed. That subtle flick is everything, and pronounce the words clearly. I don't want to see anyone lying on the ground after waving their wand. He split the class into pairs. Sherlock partnered with Seamus, Hermione with Neville, Harry and Ron paired up. After a year of teaching, Flitwick had learned the best way to arrange practice. Pair the precise students with the ones more likely to cause catastrophes. Sherlock and Hermione were among the few who could steady the explosive sorts. They could keep Seamus's botched charms from doing too much damage. The other partners were there to bring along the less talented, notably Neville, so Flitwick could leave them in capable hands. Many students had tried the freezing charm from textbooks after the defense class, but success in today's lesson was limited. Very few managed it at all, even fewer on their first try. Sherlock and Hermione were the exceptions. Both cast it correctly and earned 10 points for Gryffindor. Harry got it after several attempts. Flitwick gave no extra points for not doing it on the first try. Seamus, sitting opposite Sherlock, kept flicking his wand and changing his accent until, as usual, he produced an explosion. Sherlock, already prepared, stepped in and cast Immobilis to freeze the mishap, an impromptu demonstration. "Sorry, Holmes, I don't know what's wrong," Seamus muttered, embarrassed. "I always seem to cause trouble." Sherlock looked at him without speaking, pondering as he often did when catastrophe followed someone like Seamus. Could it be genetic? He could probably specialize in blasting charms, Sherlock thought dryly. Neville struggled repeatedly. Hermione took on the stern teacher role. "Pronounce it properly. Immobulus," she said, emphasizing the first syllable. "The M must be strong." If it had been Ron, he would have retorted, "If you're so brilliant, why don't you do it yourself?" But Neville was timid. He nodded and tried again and again. His skill at charms lagged behind his aptitude for herbology, and mastering a new charm in a single lesson was a tall order. With Hermione's patient corrections and his own doggedness, he made progress. At the end of the period, he did manage to produce the charm, only partly successful. Trevor's eyes and front legs froze stiff, but his hind legs kicked frantically. The absurd rhythm made Hermione's hair stand on end. She flicked her wand and released a small corrective charm to relieve Trevor of his ordeal. The bell had not yet rung, but the class buzzed with the new skill in the air. A charm you could aim with, practice, and with luck, use when it mattered. Flitwick looked around at their faces, eager, nervous, determined, and allowed himself a pleased smile. 182. I don't want any face anymore. Sorry, Granger. I don't know what happened either. I keep doing this whenever I'm not careful. Neville's apology, so similar to Seamus's earlier, didn't anger Hermione. It made her smile. Having finished the practice, she wasn't as sharp as before. She said earnestly to Neville, "It's all right. With your ability, you wouldn't be expected to master it in one try. You've already done very well." "Really?" Neville's face brightened. "Of course. If you're willing to keep trying, you'll get there." I'll work hard." When Hermione lifted the spell on Trevor, the toad hopped away as if afraid of being molested again. Neville darted after him to the corner of the classroom, grinning as he chased. Ron watched them and couldn't help remarking, "With your ability, you wouldn't be expected to master it in one try. Hermione, you really know how to talk. Lucky it was Neville. If it'd been anyone else, they'd be tearing her apart by now, right?" "Heh, Ronald, are you talking about yourself?" Hermione teased. "Cough, cough. That." Ron tried to cover his embarrassment with a cough. "She isn't wrong," Sherlock cut in suddenly, much to Hermione's surprise. He usually kept his observations to himself. "I don't think we should comfort people by deceiving them," he said. "Encouragement is fine, but false praise gives them the wrong idea about themselves." Ron frowned. "So what? It's not that serious." "You're wrong, Ron." Sherlock's tone was blunt. "Self-awareness is a precise instrument that needs daily calibration. Would you want a watchmaker to assemble a chronometer with rusty gears? In both the magical and the muggle worlds, an accurate sense of one's limits clears fog and avoids danger. Knowing precisely where your abilities end is the best protection." His gaze landed on Ron. "For you, That means don't try to bite off more than you can chew. Ron went pale. No one realized it, but Sherlock's remark came from experience. He'd nearly missed an important clue in the Greek interpreter case because he'd overestimated himself. If Hermione hadn't happened to work out the star chart, Hagrid's interpreter friend might have suffered the same fate as Musgrave. That near miss changed him. Even at 11 or 12, Sherlock was still growing. Hermione's steady top marks had kept Gryffindor's red hourglass, the one that counted house points, well ahead all term, which delighted Professor McGonagall. Ever since Harry arrived, Slytherin's hold on the house cup had been broken and Quidditch was improving. Everything seemed to be looking up. Then Wednesday morning's potions class snapped that momentum. By their second year, professors didn't just hand out points, they deducted them freely. Severus Snape, in particular, delighted in finding reasons. The first potions lesson had been a simple review, but Snape still managed to pull Gryffindor down. "Potter, why didn't you write down what I just said? For your arrogance, Gryffindor loses 10 points. The familiar sting of Gryffindor loses 10 points hit them all with the same resigned feeling. This is potions. This is Snape. This is Hogwarts. For Slytherin students, it meant even more. Before term started, Snape had held a full house meeting for Slytherin, scolding them for poor performance in the station inspection and urging everyone to improve. He berated students for laziness, for improper Quidditch conduct that had hurt the house's image, and for those who had needlessly provoked others and cost Slytherin points. Losing the House Cup last term, missing a 7th consecutive win, still stung. For many Slytherins, that streak would have encapsulated a student's entire career at Hogwarts. Since my enrollment, through my unremitting efforts, my house has won the cup for 7 consecutive years. That line on a resume was gone, and they were determined to take it back. Fired up by Snape's meeting, the Slytherins came into term ready to widen the gap early. Unfortunately for Gryffindor, Hermione kept racking up points unexpectedly. Snape, ever watchful, began to clip Gryffindor's lead in class. Slytherin, prepared and eager, raised hands and answered quickly. Draco and Pansy even managed to snatch 50 points between them. Near the end of class, Siamus caused a small explosion in a cauldron. Sherlock had stepped in just in time and prevented anyone from being hurt, which earned Snape's scowl. Snape's robes billowed as he stared at Sherlock. His fingers tapped the stone wall with a cold, sharp sound. "Detective Holmes," he said, sneering, "your smug expression is nauseating. Do you think waving your wand makes up for your poor judgment? Remember this, spilled potion cannot be taken back. Mr. Finnegan, for your impulsiveness, stupidity, and recklessness, Gryffindor loses 10 points." By the end of that lesson, Gryffindor's lead had been cut. Slytherin surged forward and suddenly looked like they might catch up. "They're shameless," Ron fumed after class. "They must be in league with that old bat. She told them the questions beforehand so they could jump in and get all the points. Look at Chromeboy and Poodle, practically smiling from ear to ear." Chromeboy was Sherlock's nickname for Draco Malfoy. Poodle was Ron's unflattering name for Pansy Parkinson. Ron wasn't even complaining about Snape docking points. He assumed Snape would always find fault with Gryffindor. But Sherlock dismissed Ron's theory immediately. "No, Ron, you're wrong," he said. "Huh?" The Slytherins didn't get the questions in advance. They prepared, that's all. They were ready to answer whatever Snape asked. Yes, he'll find petty reasons to deduct points, and he does favor Slytherin when he can, but his pride would never let him hand students the questions beforehand. The other students looked surprised. They hadn't expected Sherlock to defend Snape. Ron shook his head. "No, Sherlock, they're not you or Hermione. They couldn't possibly get the right answer every time unless the old bat told them. Maybe even gave them the answers. If you trust my judgment, you should know I can read people's thoughts from their expressions," Sherlock replied coolly. Then he turned to Hermione. "Hermione, you remember asking me what I thought of Edgar Allan Poe before, don't you? Is it so difficult to admit that others are excellent?" "Of course I remember." Hermione nodded, though she didn't understand why Sherlock had suddenly brought Poe up. Edgar Allan Poe once wrote about a narrator who deduced his companion's unspoken thoughts from something as small as tripping over a stone and then looking up at the stars. That's actually how I worked out that Professor Snape hadn't told the Slytherin students the questions in advance. I noticed their tiny expressions and hesitations when they answered, just like the character in the story pieced together clues from small actions. Sherlock listened, blinked once, and then nodded slowly. Yes, the logic is very similar. Both approaches start with an apparently insignificant detail, watch the behavior, and infer the thought process behind it. Hermione couldn't help but recall Sherlock's earlier disdain when she'd mentioned Poe. After a year together, she had come to see that Sherlock wasn't bragging. Compared with the detectives in Poe or Christie, he really did seem like someone who'd stepped out of a novel. And he was only 12, a prodigy with room to grow. Most of the other students looked bewildered by the conversation. Only Hermione had the background to follow it. Even Muggle-born children rarely knew Poe at their age, and pure-blood wizards often had almost no Muggle cultural knowledge at all. Ron frowned. I don't know who you're talking about, but it sounds made up, like Lockhart, just for the attention. My dear Ron, Sherlock said dryly, I wasn't going to say anything, but since you've brought it up, here's my deduction. Under the intense gaze of the Gryffindors, Sherlock laid out what he'd noticed. When the Slytherins were asked, most of them showed a brief look of surprise before thinking. Malfoy had his eyebrows raised and a flash of surprise in his eyes. That's not the expression of someone who'd been told the questions ahead of time. If they'd known, they'd be composed and confident, not startled and flustered. Their answers weren't fluent. There were pauses and hesitations. That girl on potions trailed off for a few seconds and even stammered. Prepared students would have answered smoothly and quickly. Also, they glanced at one another before replying, seeking confirmation or help. Those facts point to them not having been given the questions in advance. As for what you suggested, well, if you wanted to, you could read the book beforehand. The group exchanged looks, some convinced, some skeptical, some simply lost. Harry trusted Sherlock implicitly. Ron still frowned. Just read the book beforehand. Easier said than done. How many people actually do that? Ron grumbled. Is it so difficult to admit someone else is good at something? Hermione cut in decisively. Ronald, just because you can't do it doesn't mean others can't. But you raised your hand too, and the old bat still wouldn't call on you, Ron protested. That's the professor's choice, Hermione replied. Ron had no real comeback, especially with Hermione backing Sherlock, so he changed the subject. He clapped Seamus on the shoulder. Don't worry, mate. Hermione'll get those lost points back for us in other classes. Sherlock's eyebrow twitched. Ron's thinking was transparent, and Sherlock made a mental note to find a way to teach him a lesson. Seamus, who'd been consoled, wore a long face. You're right, but it's pointless. Snape will still dock points from Harry. Everyone fell silent for a moment. Seamus's logic made sense. Then Neville, clutching Trevor he'd finally caught again, spoke up timidly. Last term we fell behind too, but we got the points back in the end, didn't we? After a beat, the whole table burst out laughing. Ha ha! Well said, Neville. So you're planning to hand this whole thing to our king and savior again? I'm not. No, don't say that. Neville flailed, desperate not to be misunderstood. Ron grinned and put a friendly arm around Neville. You know, last term, Dumbledore gave us loads of points for protecting the Philosopher's Stone. You don't honestly expect something like that to happen again and make up the difference, do you? Even Seamus laughed. Yeah, Neville, if that happened every term, Hogwarts would turn into Azkaban. If it did happen again, then I'll be 20 before I find a girlfriend. No, I won't have a girlfriend by 15. Ron blurted, then flushed. He was only half joking. That last term had been extraordinary, and he'd rather not rely on miracles repeating themselves. He also remembered, with a private shiver, that Sherlock had stabbed Quirrell last year. Strange things did happen at Hogwarts. Afternoon history of magic was exactly the same as before, a ghost droning on. Professor Binns never asked questions. His lectures were dry, and his monotone sent half the class to sleep. Only Sherlock listened with rapt attention. Sherlock, I admire you, Harry said, looking over with genuine wonder. How can you listen to something so dull? Sherlock smiled. My dear Harry, I've solved countless mysteries from tiny clues because I know many past cases. History works the same way. For the wizarding world, history is a silent teacher. It reveals the context and development of our magic. For those of us from Muggle families who've never been around magic before, understanding the past can be especially useful. Harry nodded thoughtfully. Ron, hearing them, brightened. Old Sherlock, your history grade was only an A last year, same as mine. Are you going to study history of magic as seriously as you do astronomy? Times have changed, Sherlock said. I used to learn only what I thought useful, but after the Greek interpreter case, I changed my mind. In this world, you only recognize the use of some knowledge when you need it. If you don't know a subject at all, you won't even know what's possible. So you're finally giving up on the idea that the brain is an attic? I still think the brain is an attic that needs clearing of pointless rubbish, Sherlock replied. After reading Lockhart, I'll remember his exploits, but I won't bother remembering his favorite color. Hermione rolled her eyes so hard Ron and Harry almost laughed. Only Sherlock could get her that exasperated. After class, Ron was still chuckling. What are you laughing at? Harry elbowed him. I just remembered something good, Ron said. What? I can copy Sherlock's history homework now, as well as his astronomy, Ron guffawed. Harry and Ron walked back, Ron proud and conspiratorial, Harry bemused. On the third night of term, Sherlock went into the Forbidden Forest alone for the second time. This time there was no grateful unicorn to be found, but the expedition still went well. He observed several magical plants and creatures he hadn't seen before, bringing more practical knowledge to match his theories. He also uncovered a good portion of the map mist shrouding the forest. Without the unicorn's help, however, he'd stayed later than he had on his first trip and didn't get back to the dormitory until much later. Exhausted, he fell onto his bed and slept hard, exactly as he'd expected. The Forbidden Forest was vast. One couldn't expect to meet a unicorn on every visit. Even if he had found one, it might not have been the same creature he'd saved. Spacing his expeditions to once every 3 days seemed sensible. Even the greatest detective needed plenty of rest to keep his mind sharp. As the weeks passed, Sherlock's routine settled into a steady rhythm. Every morning, he took Harry out to practice boxing and fencing, training the savior of the magical world in close-quarters combat. After breakfast, he attended his lessons on time, no longer skipping individual classes as he had the year before. Every 3 nights, he visited the Forbidden Forest, constantly updating and refining his map of it in his mind palace. On weekends, he went to the library with Hermione to deepen his study of the magical world. Aside from those nightly excursions, life at Hogwarts was almost the same as last term. The only real change was defense against the dark arts. Last year, Sherlock had attended only 2 of Quirrell's lessons before he began to cut classes, and only promised Professor McGonagall he wouldn't skip again when he helped Harry make the Quidditch team. This year, he hadn't missed a single defense against the dark arts lesson. Gilderoy Lockhart's reputation had spread through the school. Not only did he perform well in the second-year classes Sherlock and his friends attended, his demonstrations in other years were also striking. Like the freezing charm he had used on the Cornish pixies, the spells he showed in class were often simple and blunt, but cleanly effective. Everyone was surprised. For once it seemed Hogwarts had a properly competent defense against the dark arts teacher. Even the professors who had disliked him at first had grown less openly hostile, though they had not entirely forgiven his ridiculous little entrance exam he gave at the start of the year. Apart from a few trick questions, most of it resembled a Lockhart fan club questionnaire more than a serious test. No one could finish it except Hermione. Several young witches admired Lockhart as much as she did, but even they couldn't remember every single one of his hobbies. Not even Sherlock could answer the last section of weightier questions correctly. Before every lesson, Lockhart would flash his most disarming smile, and even during formal teaching, he would weave tales from his own adventures into the hour. For the boys, it was infuriatingly showy, greasy, to put it bluntly, but the girls loved it. They said his real-life exploits made him more down-to-earth and utterly perfect. The older wizards were quietly satisfied as well. They dared not ask for more. The point, they kept telling their juniors, was that a stable defense against the dark arts teacher was a rare blessing. Ever since Voldemort's fall, the post had been cursed, professors tended to last a year at most. That kind of turnover had driven many capable wizards away, who wanted to risk a career that might end in scandal, injury, or worse after a single year. So having someone like Lockhart, flaws and all, who could actually teach useful skills, was something to be grateful for. Use him while you've got him, the older faculty warned. Lockhart had made a terrible mess with the pixies in his first class, and the whole school remembered it, but in the lessons since then, he'd shown he could control things. He brought into class creatures the ministry would grade as XX or even XXX, chameleonic snails, hairy worms, urklings, kappas, kelpies, and yet there was no repeat of the earlier chaos. Over time, his classroom manner even seemed effortless. Compared to Quirrell's year of disaster, Lockhart shone. "Where did you hear all this?" Ron demanded when Harry started relaying these stories in detail. "Cho told me," Harry said. "You mean Cho Chang? When did you get so close to her, you little rascal?" "Yesterday. Sherlock and I were out for morning exercise, and we ran into her, so we chatted." Harry's cheeks colored faintly. Since the start of the term, his relationship with Cho had been better than before. They shared more topics now, and it had helped that Cho was Ravenclaw's seeker this year. Hermione made a small sound of disapproval. "Professor Lockhart is a Ravenclaw originally. That house has the greatest number of girls, so no wonder they support him most. It's a pity, though. Nobody in Ravenclaw has beaten my perfect score on his test. Not now, not in the future. After all of his opening term tests for all 7 years are finished." "You can't be so sure, Hermione," Ron grumbled. "Who knows what tricks he'll pull next? Don't forget last time he made us recite endless passages from his books. If you prepare, getting a perfect score isn't hard." "That's the point. It's meaningless," Hermione sniffed. "Only I can do it properly." "Proud much?" Ron said incredulously. "You're just jealous," Hermione shot back. "Jealous of you? Don't be ridiculous." "Of course, because—" "Shut up!" Ron barked. "You're disrupting my thoughts," Sherlock cut in dryly. They fell silent at once. Hermione tugged Sherlock into a discussion about 1,000 magical herbs and fungi, and the two launched into a detailed exchange of knowledge points. Harry and Ron exchanged a look and shrugged. They were used to it. Second-year courses were harder than first-year ones, but only by a bit. Students adapted. Sherlock and Hermione hit the ground running and performed effortlessly. Adaptation period? What adaptation period? Harry and Ron needed a couple of days, and by the end of the week, they were back in form. Seamus and Dean took a full week to switch back into school mode after the holidays. Neville, however, still seemed perpetually dazed. "Potter, why didn't you remind Mr. Longbottom to stir the potion only after it had completely cooled? Do you think his mistake makes you look better? 10 points from Gryffindor." Professor Snape had snapped. After class, Neville approached Harry with a remorseful expression. "Sorry, Potter. If it hadn't been me, you wouldn't have been reprimanded." "It's not your fault," Harry said. "Even if you hadn't done anything, Professor Snape would have found another excuse to dock points. But I really forgot to wait for it to cool before stirring. Just remember next time." "Neville, Holmes is right," Ron added with a perfect Snape impersonation. "Potter, who told you to stir the potion with your left hand? 10 points from Gryffindor." The mimicry was so dead on that they all burst out laughing. Neville managed a weak smile, but still looked miserable. "It's all right, Neville," Hermione soothed. "You'll win those points back in Professor Lockhart's class." She had a reason to be confident. Lockhart's defense against the dark arts lessons had a routine. Begin with his charming smile and self-praise, weave in theatrical readings from his books, then end with what he called classic scene reenactments, where students helped him recreate scenes from his adventures. It was absurd. Defense against the dark arts should not be a stage show. But it worked in one way. It let Lockhart cast Neville in lots of villainous parts. To Lockhart, Neville was like a little badger who had sneakily wandered into a pride of lions, timid, compliant, and hopelessly unassuming. By making him play werewolves, vampires, or wraiths, Neville's clumsy manner only made Lockhart appear more kingly. As a result, Neville regularly earned a surprising number of points for Gryffindor in Lockhart's class, often more than he ever did in his best subject, herbology. It was an unexpected boon, and for Neville, it made all the difference. "Miss Hannah, please be gentler," Neville begged. Because of complicated circumstances, Neville Longbottom had been raised by his grandmother from a very young age. As a member of the Sacred 28, his family had long assumed he was a squib, born into a wizarding family, but without any magic. Of course, that turned out to be wrong. Neville was a wizard. The problem was that his performance at Hogwarts left a lot to be desired. He was slow to react, his memory was poor, and he was timid and withdrawn. For a long time, he wondered whether the Sorting Hat had made a mistake putting him in Gryffindor. He couldn't even compare to the top students like Harry and Ron. He didn't even match up to ordinary classmates such as Seamus and Dean. His grades hovered around the passing line. The only subject where he excelled was herbology. Both interest and talent lay there, so he would never have imagined that he would one day become the favorite of a professor. Even more surprising, that professor was the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. When the bell rang, Professor Gilderoy Lockhart began his usual three-part routine. First, he boasted about his heroic exploits, then he randomly quizzed the class on the textbook, and finally, he staged a dramatic reenactment. Today's material came from the textbook Traveling with Trolls. Lockhart picked Neville without hesitation to play the troll he'd supposedly bested in the book. Neville, by now, was all too familiar with this role. He performed naturally, and as the lead actor, he would earn a healthy haul of house points for Gryffindor. For that reason, he adored Lockhart almost as much as the cluster of girls who worshipped the professor. After finding Neville, Lockhart called a few Hufflepuffs to be background villagers. For the next half hour, they put on a full stage play, identical to the scene in his book. Oh no, the troll is attacking the village. What? Hurry, send for Mr. Lockhart. Don't worry, Chief. With me, Lockhart, recipient of the 3rd Class Order of Merlin, honorary member of the Anti-Dark Arts League, and 5-time winner of Wizard Weekly's Most Charming Smile, a mere troll is nothing. It's wonderful that Mr. Lockhart is here. Mr. Lockhart is simply too handsome. Mr. Lockhart, I want to have your baby. Aside from the players and Lockhart's admirers, most of the class was either dozing or speechless. Lockhart didn't seem to notice. He nodded, thrilled with himself. Excellent work. 10 points to everyone who cooperated, and 30 points to Longbottom. Polite applause broke out. Then Lockhart announced, "Now I'll demonstrate how I defeated the troll." At that, the sleepy students straightened up. Everyone knew this was the essential part of Lockhart's class, the practical demonstration at the end that made the theatrics worthwhile. Pay attention. Although Mr. Longbottom looks rather strong on stage, he's still far from a real troll. First, Mr. Longbottom, please cast a shield charm on yourself. I demonstrated this spell in our last class on Wandering with Werewolves. Neville stepped forward, wand in hand, and tried to cast the shield charm. He missed several times. "Tsk, tsk, Mr. Longbottom," Lockhart said, shaking his head with mock disappointment. "If you'd been fighting a troll, you'd have died many times over. I taught you this last class. Seems you didn't review, did you?" "I'm sorry, Professor," Neville stammered, crestfallen. "I really did study, but—" "All right, don't look so innocent. Miss Abbott, you're playing a passerby. Please cast the shield charm on Mr. Longbottom." "Huh? Oh, okay." Hannah Abbott had not expected her small part to include a spell. She hesitated, then stepped forward, raised her wand, and aimed at Neville. He grew more nervous. "Hannah, please be gentle." "Don't worry, Mr. Longbottom," Hannah said, seeing his expression. "I'll be careful." She spoke, and then, "Protego!" A blue light erupted from her wand and struck Neville squarely. "Very good. 10 points to Hufflepuff." Lockhart praised, delighted by Hannah's conscientiousness. "Now, I'll show you how I dealt with werewolves back then," he continued, sweeping his gaze over the class. He drew his wand and aimed at Neville. The whole room leaned forward. Even those at the back stood to get a better view. Neville trembled. Lockhart raised his wand and cried, "Stupefy!" He did not hit Neville directly. The spell was intended to bounce off the shield charm Hannah had placed. But when the Stupefy deflected, it ricocheted and struck Hannah instead. There was a flash and a sharp cry of, "Ouch!" Hannah collapsed, unconscious in an instant. Silence fell. Lockhart, momentarily stunned, recovered quickly and smiled his practiced smile. "See? Did you all see? I deliberately reduced the strength of the charm so Miss Abbott's shield could defend." Even so, my boundless magical power is overwhelming for ordinary students, which is why Miss Abbott fainted. The class had grown used to Lockhart's habit of self-promotion, and the girls in particular cheered at his theatrics. Hannah, however, lay motionless. Lockhart leaned over and with a flourish performed a counterspell. Renervate! A red spark flashed and Hannah's eyes flew open. She scrambled to her feet amid exhales and murmurs, dusted herself off, and backed away. She hadn't even realized she'd been knocked out. Too dangerous, she muttered, still shaken. Lockhart, pleased with the drama, waved his wand again. Accio desk! Neville's desk flew up as if by an invisible hand and plunked down in front of him. Quiet, please, Lockhart said, the voice suddenly solemn. Now, witness a classic moment. He raised his wand slowly, his fingers trembling as if gathering power. The room grew still. Then he flicked his wrist with the flourish of an eagle's strike and shouted, Reduco! Lockhart's performances were always overblown, but the Reduco charm was no small thing. If it connected, it could blast apart even solid obstacles. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Neville's face drained of color. His lips trembled, and he shut his eyes tightly. On instinct, or by sudden, terrified reflex, he raised his wand and murmured, Protego! A faint blue shield shimmered into being and steadied itself before him. For a moment there was surprise on Lockhart's face. Neville had actually managed a shield charm. Lockhart did not pause. The Reduco charm, crackling with force, hurtled straight toward Neville. 186. No foreplay. Just get straight to the point. Professor Lockhart's blasting charm slammed into Neville's shield charm and shattered it almost instantly. Compared to an adult wizard's magic, a second year's hurriedly cast shield was nothing. Fortunately, the Accio Neville had used earlier took effect at the same moment. With a deafening boom, the whole classroom seemed to tremble. The explosion filled the room with a ringing in everyone's ears. The spell Lockhart had thrown struck the desk in front of Neville and blew it to splinters, the wood and dust spraying like snowflakes. Acrid smoke and powder hung in the air for a long moment before the classroom finally began to clear. Neville stood amid the settling dust, hair plastered to his forehead, his clothes flecked with wood and powder, looking a complete mess. He seemed dazed, as if he had not yet understood what had happened. The desk that had been used as a shield was nothing but a pile of fine dust on the floor. The class stared, mouths open. The silence was so thick you could hear breaths. Only then did Neville register the danger. His legs collapsed, and he fell to his knees with a thud, his wand slipping from his hand and clattering to the floor. No one laughed. If the spell had hit him directly, he would have been blown to pieces like the desk. That, Lockhart announced, eyes bright with triumph, is the blasting charm. That's the very move I used to bring down the troll, he crowed. Even though it was enormous, up against a wizard of my caliber, it could only taste defeat. He turned to the class with a graceful bow, his periwinkle robes floating around him. The students erupted into applause, this time not just polite noise, but genuine, awed clapping. Lockhart basked in it. Now, he continued, I trust you no longer doubt the power of the blasting charm. Just imagine, if that had hit Longbottom. Neville shuddered and hugged himself, eyes wide with terror. Lockhart smiled at the reaction. Of course, a troll's hide is much tougher than a desk. Even a dueling master like myself couldn't fell one with a single blast. For the full account, refer to my publications. That's all for today. Oh, I almost forgot. With another elegant flick of his wand, the shattered desk's boards knitted themselves back together, legs snapping into place as if nothing had happened. The repair drew fresh applause, especially from the girls clustered around him, starry-eyed and adoring. Lockhart, who had not been taken very seriously at first, had managed to prove himself time and again with flamboyant demonstrations. When the bell rang, Lockhart left the classroom grinning like a conqueror, trailed by a cloud of admirers. The rest of the students gathered around Neville. He stood at the center, flustered and scratching his head, answering a dozen questions at once. He grew red and fumbled through his explanations. When he mimed the supposed impact of the spell, everyone gasped anew. Ron watched from the edge of the crowd, frowning. I don't get it, he muttered, his accent tightening with irritation. I admit, Lockhart's talent is obvious, but why's he put on such a circus for most of the lesson? Why can't he just skip the show and get to the point. I don't understand it either, Siamus agreed. If he cut the nonsense, he could be Hogwarts' best teacher. He's trying to make the lesson more immersive, Parvati Patil objected, arms folded, standing a little straighter than before. Didn't he say, only by getting into your role can you have the best experience? Look at Longbottom. Everyone notices when the method works. Even without it, the teaching is enough, someone else protested. Humph, Parvati sniffed. Do you know how many girls dream of acting with Professor Lockhart? Be grateful. That's not something to brag about, Siamus shot back. Only you lot would think so. Who's calling me a lot? Parvati bristled. Don't forget, the top student in our year is a girl too. They bickered, some siding with Siamus, others cheering Parvati on. Ron egged them on, enjoying the chaos. Harry watched it all, then turned to Sherlock. Sherlock, what do you make of it? Sherlock, who had watched the whole lesson with meticulous attention, including Lockhart's theatricalities, slotted his quill back into his case and answered briskly. He spends 2/3 to 3/4 of each lesson on performance, leaving only a short time for actual instruction. From how he allocates his time and how he behaves, it's clear he prefers the spectacle. The practical teaching seems, for him, merely a task to be completed. But that's the part we need, Harry said, voicing what most of them felt. If Lockhart didn't teach anything of value at the end of class, the students wouldn't tolerate the self-indulgent theatrics. Some girls, Hermione among them, still flocked to Lockhart after every lesson. Hermione, now one of his most ardent admirers, leaned over and said to Harry, "You've found another blind spot, Harry." Sherlock smiled slightly. There's no doubt Lockhart has real ability, but he cares more about his glamorous public image and the profits behind it. Profits? Harry repeated, surprised. Remember the textbooks that were torn in the first class? Sherlock said. I noticed Lockhart's expression the moment those books were ripped. He looked oddly pleased. I thought it was strange, Harry said. Why would a teacher be happy about students losing their textbooks? From a normal teacher's standpoint, it's nonsensical, Sherlock agreed. But look at it from the perspective of a businessman with plans. Harry's face cleared into understanding. If students' textbooks are ruined, they have to replace them, and every replacement book sold by Lockhart, especially if it's his own works, would be a tidy sum. Sherlock nodded. After the first class, he was eager to find those unlucky students. He offered to sell them a full set of his books at a 30% discount. Harry's eyes widened. So instead of being a burden, buying the books feels like a bargain. They'll thank him for it. Exactly, Sherlock said. He isn't primarily interested in the subject itself. Teaching is a formality. His real aim is fame and profit, boosting his career to the next level. Harry finally saw the pattern. Sherlock watched him for a moment longer and then fell silent. He had noticed other things too, but lacked the evidence to say more. For now, gathering proof would have to wait. The Ravenclaw Dean's office was a small, cozy chaos. Professor Phileas Flitwick sat buried under a mountain of parchment. The warm yellow light from a magical chandelier washed the room in a comfortable glow. Shelves lined the walls, packed with ancient books of magic. Every so often, one would murmur quietly to another, as if sharing secrets. Flitwick was beginning to feel the strain and wondering whether a restorative from Snape might be in order when a crisp knock on the door broke the quiet. Come in! Flitwick did not even look up at first. He waved his wand, and the door opened with a soft creak. Only when he saw who stood framed in the doorway did he startle, then recover with an eager wave. Why, it's you! Come in! Do you have a new case? Sherlock stepped inside in a neat wizard's robe, his collar a little open and his hair slightly disordered. The keen light in his eyes was as sharp as ever. With Flitwick's permission, he crossed the room, his gaze taking in the familiar surroundings. He'd been in the Ravenclaw Dean's office before. Nothing seemed different now. With Sherlock's gifts, answering Ravenclaw's door knocker was child's play. Flitwick hopped down from his tall, carved chair and suddenly seemed even shorter. When he realized he had to look up to see Sherlock, he laughed and leaped back onto the cushion. Up and down in less than 3 seconds, then, clearing his throat, he gestured toward the seat opposite him. Sit down. Sherlock sat, bringing himself level with the shorter professor. Flitwick nodded with the satisfied air of someone content with proportions, but Sherlock wasted no time on pleasantries. "Professor, I didn't come on a case today. I heard Professor Lockhart graduated from Ravenclaw, so I wanted to ask you about him." "Gilderoy Lockhart?" Flitwick's eyebrow shot up. "Why the sudden interest?" "Because of his performance in Defense Against the Dark Arts," Sherlock said. He went on to describe Lockhart's recent classroom theatrics and stated his suspicion plainly. "He didn't come here to teach." Flitwick listened, then nodded. "I see. What do you want to know?" "Everything you know," Sherlock said. Flitwick gave a fond laugh. "You are relentless. Very well. Everything." He settled into memory. As a student, Lockhart was an extraordinarily clever boy. He's a half-blood, father a muggle, mother a witch, and he has two older sisters, both muggles. His mother doted on him. With that kind of unreserved pampering, he grew a little full of himself. Sherlock listened, nodding. Family shapes children more than most people admit. Flitwick's words called to mind other contrasts, the spoiled and the unspoiled, though he made no more than the briefest comparison. "When he received his Hogwarts letter, I had only recently become dean," Flitwick continued, amusement in his voice. "You know, Sherlock, Lockhart very nearly became a hat stall." "A hat stall?" Sherlock was quick to piece it together. "So he might have been nearly sorted elsewhere. Slytherin, perhaps?" "You're sharp as ever." Flitwick smiled at the deduction. He expected to be the center of attention, just as his mother had taught him to expect. But Hogwarts is full of bright, talented young witches and wizards. He wasn't the most brilliant there, though he was well above average. He could get good marks with little effort because he had the brains, but he was hopelessly opportunistic. If something couldn't be done spectacularly, he wouldn't bother. All of us teachers agreed. Had he applied himself, he would have done well, just not to the heroic heights he liked to promise. "You mean he bragged," Sherlock said. "Oh, he bragged." Flitwick's eyes twinkled. "He told classmates he'd create the Philosopher's Stone before graduation, lead England's Quidditch team to a World Cup, and become Britain's youngest minister for magic." Sherlock made a slightly incredulous face. Flitwick chuckled. "I thought the Sorting Hat might have preferred Slytherin, to be honest. He studied as if to be noticed. He once petitioned the headmaster to start a school paper just so his name would be printed. Dumbledore refused, and Lockhart only escalated. He used magic to carve his name in 20-foot letters on the Quidditch pitch, week of detention. He once projected his own portrait into the sky the way the dark mark is displayed. More points docked, more detention. He sent 800 Valentine's cards to himself so that the Great Hall was littered with owl droppings and feathers. Breakfast wasn't happening that day. Flitwick rattled off more of Lockhart's student escapades, and Sherlock could see why the staff reacted the way they did when Lockhart appeared at the start of term. Where there's smoke, there was certainly smoke here. And the strangest thing, Flitwick continued, expression darkening into puzzled annoyance, was how he got positions. In his 5th year, the prefect at the time came to me and asked to hand his badge to Lockhart. In his 7th year, the head boy gave up his position the same way. Prefect and head boy are not handed over lightly. They're chosen by merit and character. Yet Lockhart had them handed to him as if it were a favor. There was much speculation. Some of us wondered if he had Vila blood. Flitwick frowned, the confusion plain on his face. He chuckled nervously at the memory, and Sherlock smiled without answering. He had little doubt how such things might be accomplished if one chose to do so. He simply disdained the methods. "When he graduated, we all breathed a sigh of relief," Flitwick went on. "Then he became a moderately famous author. He traveled the world, his fame grew, and before long he was a superstar. He even received the Order of Merlin, 3rd class. Flitwick tapped his chest with mock indignation. "You know, I don't even have that." Sherlock detected the undercurrent of resentment in the dean's voice. An old student ascended to celebrity and honors that the teacher, who had judged him all too shrewdly at the time, did not possess. The irony was not lost on either of them. 188. Crazy Girl. After the Quirrell incident, the Defense Against the Dark Arts position became vacant again that year, and Dumbledore found him. Although he's accomplished a lot, everyone, myself included, remembered his performance as a student, so we were all baffled by Dumbledore's choice. At the time, I thought he'd been picked because no one better wanted the job. but perhaps I misjudged him. You're right, though he craves fame, pursues vanity, and his reasons for taking up the post are hardly pure, he can still be considered a capable defense against the dark arts professor. Professor Flitwick finished and folded his hands. As Sherlock had expected, the Ravenclaw dean knew more than most. Sherlock sat with his fingers steepled beneath his chin and listened in silence. Sherlock, Flitwick added, so long as he can teach students real skills, why pry into his past? Everyone at Hogwarts keeps secrets, do they not? A faint melancholy passed over Flitwick's face for a moment. Sherlock didn't notice it. After a beat, he stood and bowed slightly. You're leaving already? Yes, Professor. Your description was very clear, and it helped a great deal. Thank you. Flitwick watched him go, surprised for an instant, then chuckled. This little fellow, really. He shook his head and buried himself in the mountain of parchment on his desk. Outside the office, Sherlock systematically sorted through the information Flitwick had given him. Lockhart, above-average magical talent, a thirst for performance, highly utilitarian, good academic results but frequently controversial. Traveled the world after graduation, had a sudden revelation, and staged a triumphant return. No wonder he was nearly sorted into Slytherin, Sherlock murmured. A faint smile touched his lips. That mixture of ambition, self-importance, and talent fitted Slytherin well. Flitwick had even admitted he'd misjudged Lockhart and advised Sherlock not to dig. Sherlock had no quarrel with that. Deeds matter more than motives. If Lockhart could teach useful defensive spells, his vanity was incidental. Flitwick's account also explained the contradiction Sherlock had sensed in the man, a battle between ideals and reality. Still, questions remained. The most puzzling thing was Lockhart's inconsistency in magical ability. Sherlock had noticed that Lockhart's charm work improved markedly since the first lesson. Most people assumed he'd deliberately held back at the start, but Sherlock had seen something else. When the pixies first broke loose, Lockhart's panic was genuine. More importantly, Lockhart seemed reluctant to use truly effective charms. He favored flashy, self-invented incantations like Pesca-Pixie Pesternomi, and even when they had no effect. In every defense lesson, there was a visible aversion to practical magic, a hesitation that only eased after the charm succeeded. Everyone watched the results. No one noticed the reluctance itself. He walked on, thinking, and then found himself outside the castle gates. He had drifted almost without noticing, and more remarkably, had done so unseen. His stealth had become instinct. Since he was already at the gate, he stepped through. This spot was where they had arrived by carriage at the start of term, the one time he'd been the only one who could see the creatures pulling the coach. There was a carriage there now. The shaft still held the same pale, skeletal animals that ordinary people could not perceive. A girl stood beside them, peculiar in appearance. From behind, Sherlock could see dark golden-brown hair, radish-shaped earrings, a strangely shaped necklace, and a wand tucked behind her left ear. She stroked the back of one of the creatures with unusual tenderness. Like him, she could see thestrals. He had already gathered information about thestrals, winged horses with dragon-like heads, bat-like black wings, silvery pupilless eyes, bodies so gaunt skin clung to bone. He hadn't studied them closely on arrival because he'd hurried to the opening feast. But now the creature's ribs showed clearly, a long black tail sweeping the ground, wings set on bony ridges. You can see them too, can't you? The girl's voice surprised him. He'd been confident he'd gone unnoticed. He hadn't expected someone with her back to him to know he was there. Clearly, she had detected him while he was still some distance away. Sherlock's interest sharpened. She turned. In addition to the dark hair, her skin was pale, her brows almost colorless, and her silver eyes sat slightly too wide in her face, giving her a dreamy, blank look. Up close, he could make out the beer cap necklace, a chain of flattened bottle caps, and now the face matched a file in his memory. You're Sherlock Holmes. I know you. Her eyes fixed on him with sudden clarity. Sherlock was not surprised. He tilted his head and supplied, as he often did, the information he'd already deduced without waiting for introductions. I know you too. First year, Ravenclaw. Born into a wizarding family. Your mother died when you were small and you were raised by your father. Only child. Likes to read. Name. He paused and, slightly embarrassed, finished bluntly. I forgot. Her eyes widened, genuinely startled. You don't even know my name, but you know all that about me? Then, after a moment, she laughed, a soft musical sound. I'm so silly. You're Sherlock Holmes. It's perfectly normal for you to know all that. She was odd, Sherlock noted, uncannily unbothered by oddness itself. So what's your name? Luna Lovegood. She stared at him as if drinking in his face. You can call me Luna. Can I call you Sherlock? As you wish, he said. I've always thought intelligence is humanity's greatest treasure, Sherlock. Don't you agree? Intelligence is a precious asset, Sherlock replied, but it isn't the only one. Courage, kindness, loyalty, these matter too, and often determine a person's worth more than intelligence does. Luna tilted her head, listening earnestly, and their conversation continued with an ease that made it feel like the natural order of things. You know me because others have told you about me. Penelope? Cho Chang? Or the Patils? It was head girl Penelope, and also Ginny Weasley. Oh, that's unexpected. Oh, how to put it, I suppose they think I'm a bit odd. Some call me Loony Lovegood, but Ginny stopped them from calling me that, so we're friends. I don't think she was wrong, actually. Coincidentally, I do not think of myself as normal either, Sherlock said. But that's not important. How did you notice me just now? 189. Luna Lovegood. Outside the gates of Hogwarts, Sherlock and Luna regarded each other for a long beat. That's because you're tangled up with rackspurts, Luna said. When Sherlock asked how she'd noticed them, she gave him a sympathetic look. When you came over just now, I felt several of them buzzing around. Rackspurts? Sherlock raised an eyebrow. Rackspurts, invisible things that float into your ears and make your brain go fuzzy? Luna flapped her hands in the air, as if shooing away invisible moths. Sherlock watched her, uncertain whether she was joking, and then found himself chuckling softly. Interesting. He ran through his mind palace for 3 seconds and came up empty, no entry for rackspurts. He dug through the Hogwarts library material he'd encountered over the last 2 years. Still nothing. Luna didn't wait for him to explain his curiosity. She reached out and stroked the Thestral's flank. Suddenly, she said, "You've seen death too." "Evidently," Sherlock answered. "Many people say Thestrals are unlucky, that anything who sees them brings misfortune. What do you think?" She fixed him with a steady look that might have felt uncanny coming from anyone else. Sherlock kept his expression neutral. "Evidence." "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "Evidence," he repeated. "Any claim needs evidence to be considered valid." Sherlock glanced at the Thestral beside them. "So far, there's no evidence that these creatures bring bad luck. Without evidence, I treat such stories as rumor. In contrast, according to Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them and other library sources, Thestrals are intelligent and useful. Once they bond with a rider, they're loyal and will not abandon their master. They have an astonishing sense of direction. Tell one where to go, and it will take you there. Given their speed and endurance, I suspect creatures like these could replace broomsticks for some travel, less physical strain on a wizard. What interests me now is how Hogwarts manages to handle and train them." He stepped forward and placed his hand on the Thestral. To him, its hide felt like a horse's. No surprise there, but the animal's reaction was odd. When it realized both he and Luna could see it and were touching it, its neck twitched and it drew back. "It's frightened," Sherlock observed. "Because it's used to being invisible to most people," Luna said with certainty. "Suddenly, 2 of us can see it, and it gets startled." Luna tilted her head at him. "What else do you want to ask? Go on." "You seem different from how Ginny described you," Sherlock said. Luna considered that. "She said you're a strange person, even though you're her brother's friend." "I don't exactly fit the standard definition of normal," Sherlock replied. "Really, I think you're quite ordinary." "Thank you. I'll take that as a compliment." Luna's expression shifted. "By the way, what did the death you saw look like? Can you tell me?" "There's a misconception about seeing Thestrals," Sherlock said. "It isn't merely having seen a death. Only those who have directly witnessed death and understood its meaning are able to see Thestrals. Simply seeing a death is not always enough. That's why they became associated with bad omens." Luna's gaze drifted away after his first sentence. She stopped listening to the rest. She fell into thought. Only now did it all become clear. When she was 9, her mother had died during a spellwork accident, and she had been raised by her father ever since. So I must have understood what death meant from then on, she murmured. When she blinked back to the present, Sherlock was gone. He had slipped away without fanfare. Luna wasn't surprised. People left and returned to their thoughts. She made a small noise and stroked the Thestral's glossy neck. Mr. Sherlock Holmes is not only strange, but very interesting, she said softly. Sherlock had left because he recognized that look. He himself sometimes fell into the same reverie, and he knew it could take a long time. He had spent enough time outside the gates and returned to Hogwarts Castle. There were other matters to attend to. Harry, meanwhile, didn't have time to dwell. The man everyone had been expecting finally appeared. Oliver Wood, Gryffindor's Quidditch captain, a compact, muscular bundle of energy and single-minded devotion to the sport. Since term began, Harry had been joining Sherlock for morning exercise most days. On this Saturday morning, though, Wood turned up early and woke Harry before anyone else had left the dormitory. Sherlock, Harry, and the others had barely sorted themselves out when Wood demanded, "Holmes, are you sure you're not joining the team?" He was already in full captain mode, eyes bright with possibility. "With your flying skill, you could shore up our defense across the whole pitch. Flawless!" Ron blurted out before Sherlock could answer, having been roused from bed and rubbing his eyes. Wood seemed a little bewildered when Ron repeated what he'd been thinking. "Please, Captain said that to Holmes a dozen times." "It's barely dawn," Ron complained. "Even if we're training, it shouldn't be this extreme." He'd gone out with Sherlock and Harry only once for morning exercise yesterday, and decided then that waking early was pointless. He'd told Harry last night not to wake him again. He intended to sleep in. Today was Saturday, and he had assumed he could lie in. The surprise visit from the Quidditch captain left him speechless. Wood turned back to them, earnest and relentless. "Weasley, last year you wanted to join the house team. If you plan to try again this year, you should give it a proper go. The tougher our training, the fewer mistakes we'll make in matches." "Mr. Holmes, really?" Sherlock simply shook his head. After Wood's disappointed sigh, he grabbed Harry, already in his scarlet practice robes, and dragged him off. "Oh my God, I love Quidditch, but Wood." Ron trailed off as their friend was hauled away. When the captain had gone, Ron complained to Sherlock, "I really don't know what to say about him." "Having a passion and throwing yourself at it is quite admirable," Sherlock observed. Ron snorted. "Of course you'd say that." With Harry gone and Ron having already opted out of pre-dawn exercises, Sherlock went out for his morning run alone. Solo training meant he took proper equipment this time. The wooden practice stick they used for fencing practice with Harry he left behind in the dormitory. After the run and other work, Sherlock returned to the common room and found Ron and Neville crouched over the long practice wands, the very sticks he and Harry had used for drills, running through clumsy blows and parries. "Sherlock, you're back," Ron called, grinning. "Where did you find such straight, long sticks? Our garden doesn't have sticks like these." "Holmes, I'm sorry. Ron just pulled out these two sticks and I couldn't help myself." Even now, in his second year, Neville Longbottom still hadn't shaken his shy, awkward manner. It was precisely why he'd become one of Professor Lockhart's favorites. "The lakeside is full of them," Sherlock said, glancing at the two boys. "Your grip is wrong." "We're just fooling around. Why so serious?" Ron protested. Neville brightened. "Mr. Holmes, what's the right way to hold it?" "Not a stick, a sword." Sherlock took the long stick from Ron and demonstrated a proper sword hold, something he'd shown Harry when he first began fencing. Neville watched closely, committing it to memory. After a short pause in the dormitory, Sherlock went with Ron to the Great Hall for breakfast. Hermione had arrived earlier, and seeing only the two of them, couldn't help asking, "Where's Harry?" Usually by now, Sherlock and Harry, having finished morning exercise together, would have just turned up. Today, Sherlock had arrived alone. Wood dragged him off to Quidditch practice. Ron mumbled with his mouth still full. "He woke me up too." "Early to bed, early to rise makes a wizard healthy and wise," Hermione declared crossly, then looked at Sherlock. "Are we going to the library later?" It was less a question than their usual arrangement, since last term they spent every weekend there. Before Sherlock could answer, a voice cut between them. "Sherlock, can I have a word?" A tall, elegant figure drifted up to the Gryffindor table. Chestnut hair, refined features, Gemma Farley, a sixth-year Slytherin and one of the Slytherin prefects. Hermione stiffened. Prefect Farley, what are you doing here? Didn't I just say? Gemma smiled faintly and turned to Sherlock. I'd like to speak with you privately. Hermione raised an eyebrow. Is there something that can't be said here? Gemma kept her composed smile, but her next words made Hermione bristle. Miss Granger, I invited Sherlock. This does not concern you. I'm Sherlock's friend. Hermione, though shorter than Gemma, met her glare head-on. As a friend, I have a responsibility to protect Sherlock from people with ulterior motives. Miss Granger, who are you implying has ulterior motives? Whoever answers to that, I suppose. If you mean me, that's petty. Judging by your housemate's behavior, I don't think petty is the wrong word. The house rivalry had been particularly nasty lately. Every time Gryffindor pulled ahead, Slytherin took advantage of potions to claw the points back. Professor Snape's generosity to his own students and his zeal in docking Gryffindor didn't help. Hermione had no reason to like a Slytherin prefect. Gemma, studying Hermione's formidable expression, was faintly surprised. This year's Gryffindor cohort had more than just a lion-hearted leader and a famous boy. There was also a sharp, formidable mind in Hermione. Last year, Gemma had assumed Hermione was all books and no backbone. Clearly, that assumption had been wrong. Deciding not to spar with Hermione just then, she turned back to Sherlock, her gray eyes intent. Sherlock, are you coming? Sherlock nodded and stood. Let's go. Hermione's face went tight. Sherlock, my dear Hermione, don't worry. He said it calmly and followed Gemma, leaving Hermione stunned and indignant. She spun to Ron, who was still chewing melon. All you do is eat. Why didn't you try to stop him? Stop him? Ron swallowed with effort. Why would I? That's a Slytherin prefect. Haven't you forgotten what happened at the end of last term? If she has bad intentions. Hermione, you're being paranoid. If Prefect Farley meant harm, Sherlock would see it. That's not a given, Hermione sniffed. Look, Ron said, laughing, if she really wanted to hurt Sherlock, she'd be the worried one. Besides, I don't think she's that sort of person. Even Percy and Ravenclaw's Prefect Chang said she's different from other Slytherins. Hermione relaxed a little. I hope you're right. Only one thing bothers me. What? Did you notice she called him Sherlock just now? I clearly remember last term she always said Holmes. Hermione looked up sharply. Relationships change by degrees. Starting to call someone by their first name meant a shift. She'd gotten used to addressing Sherlock by his given name and hadn't noticed Gemma doing the same. Instead, Ron had. That felt wrong. Not a good sign. Sherlock and Gemma climbed the wooden stairs together. The boards creaked softly underfoot in the quiet corridor. They walked to the fourth floor and paused before an empty classroom. Gemma eased the old wooden door open. It complained faintly. She motioned for Sherlock to enter and closed the door with a dull, sound-muffling thud. This classroom is usually empty. She went straight to the center, stopped by a table and flicked her wand. A faint blue light shivered at the tip, and 2 glasses of orange juice appeared, silver steam curling up from them. I thought you'd like these. Sherlock noticed a mint leaf perched on the rim of one glass, a neat, fussed-over touch that spoke of a house elf's fastidiousness. Gemma tapped the rim with a perfectly manicured nail and said slowly, Your friend seems to have imagined me as a chimera. Earlier, Hermione had used the word in her tense warning. A chimera, Gemma knew, was a fearsome, bloodthirsty creature, a 3-headed terror. She mimicked Hermione's expression, sky-blue eyes playing with mischief. Not seems, Sherlock replied. He sat down unhurriedly, leaning back, hands resting on armrests. It's not just Hermione. Most Gryffindors don't feel particularly kind toward you, but I don't recall a Slytherin prefect's job description including the distribution of calming potions to every paranoid Gryffindor. Gemma's frown softened with a little helplessness. Sherlock, you don't have to be so sharp with me. I can't control every Slytherin student just because I'm a prefect. Why would you need to control them? What? If Slytherins require a prefect's supervision to behave, maybe Hogwarts isn't the place for them. Her eyes lit with appreciation. She leaned forward, hands on the table, the movement revealing the graceful line of her figure beneath her robes. Sherlock, you should be in Slytherin. Resourceful, determined, a certain disregard for rules, those are Slytherin qualities. Sherlock's polite smile didn't reach his eyes, there was a faintly cool distance behind it. Sorry, Miss Prefect. As far as I know, Slytherin doesn't currently take Muggleborns. Gemma noticed the comment and pouted with mock offense. We discussed this over the summer. You promised not to call me that. And I haven't had a chance to correct you since the first night of term. All right, Gemma. So what did you call me over for today? Another Slytherin to worry about? As a prefect, you do worry yourself sick over them. She fixed him with a look. Can't I just have wanted to see you? No. Gemma blinked, surprised. Why? 191. Walking with the female prefect. If you were looking for me, you could have sent an owl or said so in the Great Hall instead of coming all the way here. When Gemma asked why she'd come, Sherlock answered without hesitation, because you saw through me. Gemma sighed, then looked at him with a meaningful expression. I came because of Draco Malfoy, she added quietly to herself, but not only for him. Miss Gemma, I think you should be clear. Compared with Marcus Flint, Draco's situation with Harry is worse. Of course I know, Gemma said. She smiled faintly and let her fingertip trace the rim of her glass. But at least compared with Flint, Draco hasn't really hurt Mr. Potter. If anything, he's usually the one who gets hurt. She listed the scores. Before term began the previous year, Crabbe and Goyle had been roughed up by Sherlock in the compartment. Malfoy had escaped, but was shaken. He'd staged a midnight duel to trick Harry and Ron and been exposed and humiliated. The whole school had laughed at him. In Quidditch, he'd mocked Gryffindor, only to have Sherlock appear unexpectedly and lead the team to a crushing win. Malfoy had been first in the line of fire and wound up in the hospital wing for a couple of days. After that, he'd learned to pick his fights and mostly stuck to insults. Sherlock chuckled at her recap. All right, he admitted. You're right. Seeing him drop his guard on topics involving Malfoy, Gemma hurried on. Draco Malfoy's father bought a Nimbus 2001 for every member of the Slytherin Quidditch team. Nimbus 2001? Sherlock's eyes lit up. He remembered a shop assistant in Diagon Alley trying to sell broomsticks to him and Hermione. Gemma took his look for ignorance and explained patiently. Yes, the same line as Mr. Potter's Nimbus 2000. It debuted in August, and it's faster than the 2000. So Malfoy's father wants his son on the Quidditch team? Sherlock asked. Exactly. I've watched Draco in flying class, Sherlock said. He's not bad. At his actual level, he could make the house team through ordinary selection, like Potter. That's the problem, Gemma said, frowning. If Draco made the team through normal tryouts, there'd be no scandal. But if he joins the team this way, even if he truly deserves it, people will gossip that he bought his place. Sherlock snorted. Isn't that already true? Huh? Draco Malfoy did buy his place on the team, Sherlock said bluntly, but you just said his flying is good enough. Those aren't mutually exclusive, Miss Gemma. He looked at the prefect, who'd brought him a stack of Magical World cases over the summer, and unlike most Slytherins, had always treated him kindly. He decided to give straightforward advice. No matter Draco's real talent, the moment his father hands out brand new Nimbus 2001s, the technicalities stop mattering. Gemma's eyes narrowed. Speak plainly, Sherlock. He chuckled and tapped the table with his knuckles. All right, let's anchor this with 3 simple points. First, Draco's flying ability is real, as obvious as a mandrake's roots. Second, his father's galleons have wrapped themselves around the team like a venomous tentacula. Money is unmistakable. Third, when talent and wealth shine at the same time, people always stare at the more dazzling thing. He picked up his glass and pointed to the beads of condensation running down the side. See this? Wipe it all you like, and people will still say it's the Malfoy Vault's frost. So my advice is, don't waste energy on the moral frost on the broom handles. Focus on the pitch. Most people care only about results. When Slytherin actually lifts the cup, the chatter stops. Gemma considered that, thoughtful. Sherlock added, remember when you repotted the mandrake? Even if the transplant was messy, what matters is that it grows. To the Slytherin team, these Nimbus 2001s are just new pots. Sherlock, Gemma began, surprised. Despite their different positions, his advice was unexpectedly earnest. She looked at him with something like gratitude forming on her face, about to say so. He cut in immediately. But if you want my personal verdict, give it up early. Huh? Gemma blinked. She couldn't follow the sudden flip. What do you mean? As long as Harry plays normally, you don't stand a chance. Gemma burst out laughing. Are you that confident in Potter? The youngest seeker in a century, Miss Gemma, Sherlock said. I don't think 7 new broomsticks can bridge that gap. With all due respect, Gemma muttered, you don't always have to put it like that. Hasn't anyone told you offend people easily? Gemma asked helplessly. So what? Sherlock raised an eyebrow. Life's hard enough. If I had to worry about everyone's feelings, I'd go mad. Forget it. Gemma sighed and smoothed a hand through her chestnut hair. Since we've come this far, let's have a drink. Her gaze went to the glass on the table with a hint of mischief and relief. Sherlock nodded, drained his orange juice in a single swallow, and set the glass down with a dull thud. Tastes good. Gemma rested her chin on her hand and watched him with a spark in her eyes. You're not worried I might spike it? I told you last time, you're not that sort of person. Her eyes brightened, and the smile on her face widened as if she'd been given a compliment. She sat up straighter. Sherlock smiled too. Honestly, compared to a chimera, I think head girl Penelope described you more accurately. Penelope? What did she say? Gemma asked, suddenly interested. She said she hated those with snake-shaped silver buckles, but you're like a mooncalf in a viper's nest. A mooncalf, for the uninitiated, is a shy magical creature, pale gray, smooth-skinned, with long legs and big round eyes, who only comes out under moonlight and dances shyly in solitude. Gemma paused, then laughed, bright and melodious. I can't believe Penelope thought of that. But, her face sharpened, a cold glint flashing through her amusement. If she thinks I'm only that harmless, she's underestimating me. Sherlock frowned slightly. He'd thought the comparison sounded like a compliment. All right, time's almost up. Gemma's smile faded into a softer expression. We'd better go. If we don't, your friend might really start thinking I'm some dangerous chimera. Whatever happens, Sherlock said. By the time Sherlock and Gemma Farley returned to the Great Hall, the sun was already up. Ron was nowhere to be seen. Only Hermione sat at their usual table. Relief washed over Hermione's face when she saw the two of them. Gemma smiled and nodded at her, then slipped away under Hermione's wary gaze. Ron went to the Quidditch pitch? Sherlock asked, scanning the table. He took bread and jam and went to look for Harry, Hermione replied. Once Gemma was out of earshot, Hermione fixed Sherlock with a stern look. You were gone ages. What did you two talk about? Just a trivial matter. Sherlock sat and tore a slice of toast. Pass the applesauce, please. Hermione handed it across, eyes never leaving him, waiting for more. Sherlock shrugged and said calmly, She came to me again for advice, this time about psychology. Psychological counseling? Hermione echoed, incredulous. 192. Since you asked sincerely, Hermione frowned. Things didn't feel so simple. She's a 6th year and a Slytherin prefect. Does she really need you for psychological counseling? My dear Hermione, don't put prefects on a pedestal. She's still just a 15-year-old girl. Humph. She's still 3 years older than you. Hermione emphasized the words older and 3, then asked curiously, So what did she come to you for? The person involved is often confused. The bystander sees more clearly. Sherlock spoke softly. Miss Gemma is a good person, a true Slytherin. Unfortunately, she values Slytherin's honor so much, she takes on responsibilities that aren't hers to bear. At Sherlock's description of Gemma, Hermione's brows drew together, almost forming a furrowed river. Wait a minute, what did you call her? Gemma? Yes, Hermione, you found a blind spot again. I didn't this time. Hermione looked slightly put out. I didn't notice because Ron reminded me. Ron, I didn't expect his observation skills to have improved. Sherlock mused then, meeting Hermione's astonished stare, continued. It was her request. She came to me this summer. Request during the summer? Hermione's eyes widened. A quiet sense of alarm crept in. She took a breath and tried to keep her tone casual. When did you two become so close? Did you have contact over the summer? Yes, this summer. Sherlock didn't hide anything and explained how he'd corresponded with Gemma over the break and that she'd arranged to meet him the first night they returned to school. He finished, under Hermione's surprised look. Now that I think about it, I'm surprised she hasn't contacted me sooner. Silence stretched between them. Sherlock ate his breakfast with his usual calm, and Hermione watched him with a complicated expression. Finally, she asked, So what did Miss Farley come to you about today? Quidditch, Sherlock answered curtly. Malfoy's father bought a set of brand new Nimbus 2001 broomsticks for every member of the Slytherin team. Nimbus 2001s? For everyone? Looks like Malfoy's father's pulling out all the stops. Hermione remembered the time she and Sherlock had been pressured by a salesperson in Diagon Alley and looked puzzled at him. But what does that have to do with Gemma coming to you? She wouldn't want you to persuade the Slytherin team to throw the matches, would she? Of course not, my friend. Why would you think that? Sherlock regarded her as if puzzled. Didn't you say she was a true Slytherin? There was a slight edge of sarcasm in Hermione's reply. And true Slytherins are excellent at that, subduing the enemy without fighting. I already said she came to me for psychological counseling. Sherlock didn't register the tone. She thinks Malfoy and his father's actions are bad for Slytherin. Malfoy, she believes, already has the makings of a qualified seeker. After recounting their conversation, Sherlock concluded, her worries unnecessary. The Slytherin team is already strong, and with Nimbus 2001s they'll be even better. But in Quidditch, the seeker matters more than anyone else. Coincidentally, Gryffindor has the best seeker in the school. The claim that Harry is the youngest seeker in a century wasn't an exaggeration. Even 7 Nimbus 2001s won't make up the skill gap between Malfoy and Harry. He paused. So my advice to her was to let go of fantasies and face reality. What reality? Hermione asked. Don't dream of the championship. For Slytherin, taking second place in Quidditch points is a victory. Hermione burst out laughing. The laugh chased away whatever irritation she'd felt. Sherlock, you really are. She looked at him, not sure what to call him. He was still the same, the brilliant detective who could infuriate people with a single phrase. When the target wasn't her, that infuriation was oddly satisfying. She bit her lip. Shall we go to the library? Sherlock didn't object. They settled into the library as they had last term. Near midday, Hermione surprised him with a request. Will you keep teaching me flying this semester? She tried to sound casual, but her cheeks were pink. They canceled flying, but I don't want a repeat of when we came back from Godric's Hollow. No problem. Sherlock didn't look up. To overcome a fear, you must face it. Get used to being high up, and you'll control your fear of heights. Hermione smiled brightly. Before they could go to the pitch for afternoon practice, they ran into a dejected Harry, followed by a consoling Ron. What's happened? Hermione asked. Harry kept his head down. Ron answered, sounding helpless. You'll never guess what happened at the pitch. He glanced at Sherlock. Sherlock had a habit of blurting the obvious. Sherlock didn't disappoint. He shifted his gaze from Harry and said lightly, Harry arrived at the pitch early but couldn't train today. Not long ago he got into a fight, which is why you mentioned the points deduction and detention. But losing points and a detention shouldn't upset him that much. Let me guess, the detention's not with Hagrid. Is it Filch? Are you polishing trophies? No, worse. Harry looked miserable. Professor Lockhart, Professor McGonagall said Lockhart specifically asked me to help him. Sherlock's interest piqued. Help him with what? Answer his admirers' letters. Harry sounded embarrassed. How did you know Harry didn't train today, and that the points deduction was from a fight? Ron demanded, astonished. My dear Ron, do you want me to state the facts that are plain to see? Sherlock smiled faintly. All right, since you asked so sincerely, Ron began, but Sherlock rushed through the explanation. Look at Harry's winter cloak. After normal training, you'd see semicircular wear from the broom's handle on the inside. There's none of that. His uniform lacks the sweat stains it should have from exercise, and the cloak doesn't have the wind-creased wrinkles and dust from being out on the pitch. All signs he didn't train. As for the fight, inspect these tears, he pointed. They're concentrated around the collar, cuffs, and chest with irregular openings and deformed fabric. Damage from mid-air collisions would be more scattered and aligned with the direction of force. These tears come from close-quarters pulling. Combine that with the facts you already mentioned, the points in detention, and it's clear Harry fought someone on the Quidditch pitch today. All right, you win. I'm an idiot, Ron admitted, ruefully. It sounds obvious when you say it, but before you point it out, I see nothing. Don't look at Sherlock like that, Hermione interjected. For him, stating these things is as simple as telling us the color of Harry's uniform. Ron smiled helplessly. Sherlock turned back to Harry. So, Harry, why does Lockhart need you? Harry shrugged. He asked Professor McGonagall for me to help him answer his admirers. What? Hermione's face lit up. Her eyes turned to bright stars. Oh my goodness, that's amazing. I want to switch with you. Give up, Hermione, Ron said, grinning. You're not the chosen one of the wizarding world. Lockhart won't be interested in you. 193. It's a violation of school rules if you get caught. Hermione immediately shot Ron a glare when she heard him speak. Ronald, shut your mouth. Ron had been about to retort, but Hermione's exasperated look shut him up. After all, lies don't hurt people. The truth's the sharp knife. Sherlock, however, steepled his fingers, leaned back slightly, and his gray eyes lit with curiosity. Writing back to fans? Intriguing. So, my dear Harry, tell me exactly what happened on the Quidditch pitch today. I'm very interested. Every detail, if you please. Thank goodness you finally asked, Ron said, relieved. I've been asking him for ages, but old Harry insisted on waiting until you two arrived before he'd tell us. I just didn't want to say the same thing twice, Harry replied, deadpan, and the four of them went back to the Gryffindor common room. At Sherlock's request, Harry began from the beginning. By custom, use of the Hogwarts Quidditch pitch was first come, first served. Whoever arrived early got to practice. But Oliver Wood hadn't gotten up early just to be first. He had applied to Madame Hooch the day before and asked to book the entire pitch. He wanted to rehearse Gryffindor's new tactics in private to keep the other houses from watching. The pitch was big. Without booking it out, an entire house could practice at the same time, so reserving it outright made sense. Unexpectedly, Slytherin showed up with a note signed by Professor Snape. Harry pushed the slip across to Sherlock. I, Professor Severus Snape, permit the Slytherin team to train at the Quidditch pitch today to train their new seeker. Sherlock glanced, nodded once. This is indeed Professor Snape's handwriting. He folded the note carefully and put it in his pocket. Hermione, puzzled, asked, Are you worried Marcus Flint would forge it? I don't think he'd have the nerve. My dear Hermione, you are quite right. Flint wouldn't have the nerve. Sherlock smiled slightly. I put it away to copy it. Copy it? Hermione's eyes widened. You said copy? My language system and your auditory system are both functioning. Yes, I did say copy, Sherlock replied evenly. Why? Hermione demanded. Ah, my friend, you should know that although Professor Snape's handwriting is distinctive, subtle variations appear depending on his mood. Note the flourish here, more flamboyant than the sample from the Philosopher's Stone incident last term. And observe this hidden turn. It's a restrained mark, which indicates he was in a good mood when he wrote this. To imitate his hand, I'll need multiple samples written in different emotional states. Who asked you that? Hermione could no longer hold back. Why would you even think of copying a professor's handwriting? What are you planning to do? Use your imagination. Hermione, Sherlock said with an odd little smile. A professor's signature is very useful. Next time Harry wants the pitch and has booked it, he can present a prepped note and avoid interruptions. Or if we need access to materials in the restricted section, a professor's signature could save us a great deal of trouble. And, for example... Enough, Hermione cut him off, speechless. Sherlock, this is not just breaking school rules, it's downright audacious. You kept that slip just to study the handwriting? Analyzing subtle differences in Snape's script under different moods. It's unbelievable. Harry and Ron, however, looked at Sherlock with admiration. No wonder the Sorting Hat put him in Gryffindor instead of Ravenclaw, Ron thought to himself. Hermione, really, you don't need to be so upset, Harry said kindly. It only counts as breaking the rules if you get caught. If you don't get caught, nothing happened. Oh my goodness, Harry, I can't believe you'd think like that. Who taught you that? Hermione wailed. Sherlock, Ron supplied, smug. Hermione covered her face, mortified. Harry ignored her and went on with the story. Professor Snape was not only the potions teacher, he was also head of Slytherin. In Hogwarts' hierarchy, after the headmaster came the 4 heads of house, and then the rest of the staff. Professor McGonagall ranked a bit higher because she was also deputy headmistress. As flying instructor, Madame Hooch couldn't very well refuse a note signed by a head of house, so she had to allow Slytherin's claim on the pitch despite Gryffindor's booking. When Harry reached this point, Ron interrupted excitedly. "Sherlock, Hermione, you might not believe it, but Slytherin's new seeker is Draco Malfoy, and his father bought the whole Slytherin team Nimbus 2001s," Ron finished, eyes shining. Hermione had recovered her composure enough to sigh. "Ron, can you not interrupt and let Harry finish?" "No," Ron protested, indignant. "That's a Nimbus 2001. The newest Nimbus this year, faster and steadier than the 2000. Malfoy's father really went all out, buying one for every player. That's..." Suddenly, Ron realized Hermione already knew. "Wait, how did you know that? Sherlock told you, didn't he? Let me guess. Sherlock observed the team and deduced something." "No, it wasn't Sherlock's deduction." Hermione's expression went subtle. "It was the Slytherin prefect who told him." "You mean Gemma Farley?" Ron's surprise grew. "She came to Sherlock just to tell him that?" "Apparently," Hermione said, a faint smile similar to Sherlock's flickering across her face. "Anyway, no more interruptions. Let Harry continue." All right. Ron's plan to drop a bombshell deflated, and he slumped, feeling oddly left out. Harry carried on. Gryffindor, led by Oliver Wood, and Slytherin, under Marcus Flint, met on the pitch with the tension already high. The Slytherin players, striding in on their new Nimbus 2001s, mocked Gryffindor's old broomsticks, said the new Nimbus flew faster and steadier than a Nimbus 2000, and the Weasleys' cleansweeps ought to be sweeping floors. That made tempers flare. At that point, someone unexpected showed up and lit the fuse. Colin Creevey, the Muggle-born first-year Gryffindor. Hermione jumped in. "Why was Creevey on the pitch? That has nothing to do with him." "Don't interrupt," Ron muttered under his breath. Harry ignored him. "I ran into Colin when I went out early this morning. He heard I was going to practice and tagged along. While we were flying above the pitch, he was taking pictures of me with his camera, and Oliver thought he might be a Slytherin spy trying to gather intelligence." Sherlock, Harry, and Hermione all glanced at Ron. "Sorry," Ron said, trying not to laugh. "I just thought of something funny." Harry turned back to the story. He'd only been above the pitch for 10 minutes at most, maybe less. As soon as Oliver saw the Slytherins arrive, he stopped the training. He insisted he had booked the pitch, but Flint's team flashed Professor Snape's note, introduced their new seeker, and taunted Gryffindor about their broomsticks. Colin, who was snapping pictures, saw them stop and ran straight onto the pitch. Harry believed Colin meant well and wanted to defend them, but he couldn't help the wry smile that crept onto his face as he remembered. Colin asked Malfoy outright if he'd bought his place on the team with money. "Well done," Ron crowed, delighted. "That kid's properly Gryffindor. Did us proud. 194. The king of fighters. That, if it were me, I'd probably have said the same thing, right?" Hermione looked a little surprised. She hadn't expected Colin to be that bold. Sherlock simply nodded. It wasn't the first time Colin had acted like that, and from that alone, the Sorting Hat had clearly made the right call putting him in Gryffindor. Ron continued the story. The result, Malfoy, in a fit of rage, called him a mudblood. Hermione's face changed instantly. She clapped a hand over her mouth. "Oh my goodness, how dare he!" "Maybe he thought he was protected by the other Slytherin players around him," Ron said without thinking. The Gryffindor team still had 3 female players, so if a proper fight broke out, Slytherin would naturally have the advantage. Harry nodded and went on. "We were all furious, and Flint had to rush in front of Malfoy and shield him to stop Fred and George from attacking. Alicia, Angelina, and Katie charged forward too, but the Slytherins blocked them." Harry paused and winced a little. "Actually, I didn't mean to fight at first, but Malfoy, thinking he was safe, kept provoking us. Seeing that smug look, I just couldn't stand it. I used the move Sherlock taught me and punched Malfoy." "The move I taught you? What was it exactly?" Sherlock asked, immediately interested. Hermione and Ron leaned in, eyes bright. "Put all your weight on your left foot. Bend the right leg slightly so you can extend and retract. Don't use just your arms. Drive the blow from your whole body, from feet up through your fist. Aim for the chin." Harry tried to explain seriously. "I hit him just like that." He couldn't help feeling a little proud as he spoke. The memory was still vivid. After the decisive punch, there had been the sickening sound of teeth hitting each other. Malfoy's tongue had been cut by his teeth on impact. He wailed, flailed his hands a few times, and then collapsed. Everyone had been stunned. No one expected one punch to do so much damage, to knock Malfoy out cold. "Well done," Sherlock said with a satisfied smile. From Harry's description, it had been a textbook uppercut. Theory was one thing, pulling it off in a chaotic situation was another. To land the blow at the right moment and with such effect, the savior of the magical world had finally made real progress after following him so long. Hermione and Ron nodded emphatically. "Still, hitting people is wrong," Hermione protested, then laughed at herself. "Next time, if you're going to fight, try to do what Sherlock does and not get caught." Harry gave a rueful smile. She was right. Fighting felt good, but the consequences were a pain. Gryffindor lost 30 points. That hardly mattered compared to knocking Malfoy out. 30 points, 50, even more, didn't change how satisfying it felt. Detention wasn't the worst either. Sherlock had set an example the previous year. Wasn't that just going to the Forbidden Forest with Hagrid? As long as he stayed with Hagrid and didn't wander off, even the dangerous forest felt like home. But Harry had not expected this detention, helping Professor Lockhart answer fan letters. He could swear his grandfather's name he would have taken back the punch if he'd known that was the punishment. "It's not that bad, Harry," Sherlock said when Harry described it. "I think you should make the most of it. Learn something from him. I'm sure Professor Lockhart would be happy to share his experience." "Experience? What experience?" Harry, Hermione, and Ron all looked surprised. Lockhart giving Harry private tutoring sounded odd, but given Lockhart's flair for popularity, it wasn't impossible. Sherlock met their looks and clarified. "I don't mean magic. I mean ask him how to handle those fanatical fans, like that little fellow with the camera." They turned to look where Sherlock pointed and saw Colin Creevey at the entrance to the common room, grinning like an idiot and walking straight toward them. "Oh no. Bloody hell. He's here again." Harry's face fell. He bolted for the door, hoping to get out before Colin could react, but Colin was very good at being a paparazzo. He'd already blocked the route. The common room was small, so there was nowhere to go. He ran, he was chased, and eventually he couldn't escape. Facing Colin's relentless, delighted enthusiasm, Harry sighed and surrendered. Colin grabbed his arm the moment Harry stopped. "Harry, this is brilliant. Are you training my reaction skills? Thank you so much for today. And, do you know? Your performance on the pitch has spread. Everyone says you're a hero." Harry looked at the overzealous Colin helplessly. He wanted to shake him off, to leave, but he wasn't good at refusing people, especially not someone who was clearly grateful. So he forced a smile and played along. He glanced at Sherlock and saw him looking at Harry meaningfully. What Sherlock had suggested about learning from Lockhart popped back into Harry's head. Maybe this was a chance to learn how to deal with fans like Colin. Colin peppered him with questions, and not long after the rest of the Gryffindor Quidditch team filed into the common room to celebrate Harry having knocked out Malfoy. Colin turned into an excited eyewitness, telling everyone what he'd seen, and for once, Harry was grateful his teammates helped break Colin's hold on him. Only, the celebration brought a few unintended consequences. Besides being called Savior of the Magical World, the Boy Who Lived, and the Dark Lord's Bane, Harry gained a new, less flattering title. King of Fighters. Although Harry wanted to object, the Weasley twins cheered the name into existence, and it stuck. "Long live the King of Fighters," they cried. It wasn't until Harry told them about detention that they let him go. "Wait, Holmes. No, Lion King can't leave. We heard your punch was taught by Holmes, worthy of the Lion King. Teach us too. Punching sounds more fun than magic." Seeing how things were going, Harry sighed and left the common room alone for the Great Hall. After a quick dinner and a short rest in the dormitory, he begrudgingly made his way up to the third floor a few minutes before 8. That was the office of the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. Last year, Quirrell had been there. This year, it was Lockhart. Thinking about it made Harry's mood even more complicated. Voldemort had stayed in that office the previous year, yet from what Harry had seen, the man he'd faced last year didn't seem as powerful as the stories made him out to be. Surely there were no lingering booby traps in the office now, he told himself. Before he could think any more, Someone stepped out of the shadows and startled him. Ouch! What are you doing? Hermione, Harry said, feeling slightly indignant. You frightened me. Shh. Hermione glanced around as if afraid of being seen. They're still celebrating. I snuck out to help you. Help me? Hermione brightened. I can come with you to Professor Lockhart's office and help. Oh no, help you write his fan letters. Her eyes shone. She looked hopeful. Okay, Harry agreed without hesitation. 195. Celebrities must act like celebrities. Nearly a month into the term, Harry had come to believe that Gilderoy Lockhart was a capable defense against the dark arts professor. That was one thing. The idea of answering a flood of admiring fan mail on Lockhart's behalf, however, still felt like a nightmare. Whether Hermione was helping him out of kindness or helping Lockhart didn't matter. If she was willing to share the burden of writing letters, she was a great help. But I don't know if he'll agree, Harry said, anxious. Don't be like that, Harry. How will you know if you don't try? But you can't tell anyone about this. Okay. Hermione's tone had an oddly conspiratorial edge, like a character from a heist movie coaxing a reluctant accomplice. They walked down the long third-floor corridor toward Lockhart's office in silence. The defense against the dark arts professor always decorates his office to suit himself, Hermione said. I wonder what Professor Lockhart's will look like. Harry, staring at the door, felt nothing but dread. I'm not looking forward to it. When they reached the door, Hermione halted, glancing at Harry when he didn't move. Harry? Under her expectant look, Harry took a breath and knocked. The door opened almost instantly, and Lockhart's smiling face filled the frame. Ah! The little rascal is here. Harry, come in. Harry managed a small, awkward smile. Hermione's eyes sparkled with excitement. Lockhart's smile widened when he caught sight of Hermione. Miss Granger, why are you here too? Hermione's face fell just slightly, but she swallowed her disappointment and asked cautiously, Professor, I wanted to help you write replies with Harry. Is that all right? Harry looked at Lockhart hopefully. The office inside was exactly as Hermione had predicted. Gaudy. The walls were covered with countless framed photographs of Lockhart, lit by candles. Some were autographed, and a large stack of photos lay across the desk. It was spacious, but every surface groaned beneath piles of letters and packages. The thought of replying to all those people made Harry shiver. He silently begged Hermione to be allowed to help. Lockhart's reply surprised them both. My dear Miss Granger, while I'm ever so pleased that you came, I'm afraid I must refuse. Professor? Hermione blinked, clearly not expecting such a straight refusal. He continued, smile never wavering. The task of replying to my fans is part of Harry's detention from Professor McGonagall. You both should be aware of that. Because of that, I cannot enlist anyone else's help, even if you are willing. But, never fear, child, Lockhart said, turning his charm on Hermione. Replying to fans is not something you do overnight. Next time I need help with this, I will certainly ask you. That will not be as a punishment, but as a request. It would be my honor to have the most outstanding student in the year assist me. 2 casual sentences, and Hermione's mood brightened immediately. As she left, still secretly pleased at the compliment, Lockhart turned back to Harry, his grin returning full force. Well, what are you waiting for? Come in, my dear Harry. Once Harry stepped inside, Lockhart shut the door and rubbed his hands together with obvious delight. I think you can address the envelopes. The tone made it sound like a glorious honor. Harry tried to decide whether to be affronted or relieved. Lockhart rummaged through the piles and held up the first letter. This one is for Lady Gladys. Bless her heart, such a devoted admirer. Harry recalled Sherlock's warning and the way Colin Creevey had been pestering him. He took the envelope and, with his mind already working on a different problem, wrote the address as quickly as he could. Before Lockhart could hand him another, Harry took a breath. Professor, actually, there's something I wanted to ask. Lockhart's eyes lit. The chosen one has questions? Speak, my boy. With my vast life experience, I can answer anything. Harry's cheeks flushed. There's a student out of my house. He keeps trying to take my picture and get my autograph. He follows me around, and it's starting to affect my day-to-day life. Lockhart laughed, recognizing the type immediately. Ah, you must mean Mr. Colin Creevey, that ardent young fan who took that photograph with us. That's him, Harry said, nodding. Excellent. It seems you're finally appreciating the weight of fame, a double-edged sword. As your teacher, I must impart some of my celebrity wisdom." Lockhart straightened his robes and assumed an authoritative air. "I wrote in Dancing with Werewolves that fame is like the gold in a niffler's pouch, very easy to get your fingers bitten." When he spoke of his books, Lockhart's confidence inflated, and for reasons Harry couldn't explain, it sounded convincing. "Harry, always remember, a celebrity must carry himself like a celebrity. If Mr. Creevey is interfering with your life, you must keep your distance, as you would from mandrake seedlings." Harry frowned. "Professor, could you be more specific?" Lockhart's eyes twinkled with mischief. "Raise your chin to the height of a tower. Look down at the camera with that 'I just saved the wizarding world from you-know-who' expression. When he says, 'Mr. Potter, would you sign this?' the proper response is short and commanding, like a charm, 'Defense against the dark arts class in 5 minutes,' and then stride away. If he blocks you on the spiral staircase, say coolly, 'Mr. Creevey, your persistence is wearing thin with the chosen one.'" Harry listened, half amused, half embarrassed. Lockhart leaned in, lowering his voice theatrically. "You must always control how close fans feel they can get. Make them feel you are approachable in spirit, but for one reason or another, cannot be physically close. If you must, let them feel protective of you so they'll defend you. Occasionally, well, there are things a celebrity learns that I shouldn't really tell a student yet." He winked. "Still, remember, a celebrity must act like a celebrity." He straightened, smoothing his violet robes. "Now then, perhaps we should practice how to convey 'I'm busy' with nothing more than a curl of the nostrils." While Harry received Lockhart's tutelage in the fine art of celebrity aloofness, Hermione returned to the Gryffindor common room, feeling a little deflated. She found Sherlock sitting in the usual spot, hands clasped under his chin. "Professor Lockhart refused me," she announced, sinking down beside him. She told him how Lockhart had declined her offer, only to mollify her with promises of future help. "He said next time he'd ask me, that it would be an honor," she finished. "That was to be expected," Sherlock said. "You already guessed how it would go. Why didn't you tell me before I went to find Harry?" Hermione asked, a touch irritated. "If I'd told you, would you have given up?" Hermione hesitated, then shook her head. "No." She smiled at the answer, acknowledging that her stubbornness was part of who she was. "I suppose I can be a bit stubborn." "That's not surprising. Gilderoy Lockhart is a very interesting person." "Interesting?" Hermione looked at him, puzzled. "Sherlock, can you be more specific?" 196. Let me tear you apart. In the Gryffindor common room, Sherlock sat calmly explaining his thoughts on Gilderoy Lockhart to Hermione. "From the first Defense Against the Dark Arts lesson, Lockhart has struck me as nothing but contradictions. He seems to like precisely the things the students dislike, and dislikes the things they like." "How can that be?" Hermione's eyes widened. "He loves publicizing his adventures, but you mean he doesn't like teaching?" "Do not doubt my judgment, Hermione. By every measure since term began, Lockhart is a competent Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. But his interest in teaching itself is far outweighed by his interest in promoting himself and his books. Remember what I said to Harry in Diagon Alley. He pulled Harry in for a photograph and gave him a whole set of his works, not out of kindness, but to use Harry's fame to further his own. Everything he's done at Hogwarts points the same way. He stages his adventures in dramatic retellings in every lesson and gets everyone to act them out. If he didn't enjoy that, why would he do it? I can tell he takes real pleasure in it. On the other hand, when actual magic is required, he resists using it." "But he does teach us real skills every lesson," Hermione began. "Exactly." Sherlock smiled faintly. "Even a passionate admirer like you knows what parts of the lessons are actually useful. Think about it. Without that useful content, would so many people play along with his theatrics?" Hermione fell silent, and then reluctantly nodded. "So there's only one truth?" Sherlock leaned back. "Gilderoy Lockhart did not come to Hogwarts to teach." Hermione stared. Anyone would react to someone asserting a professor hadn't come to Hogwarts to teach. She tried to regain composure. "You don't have to be so blunt. Maybe it's an exchange of interests. People take posts for different reasons." Sherlock's voice was quiet. "That is the fundamental logic by which society operates." Hermione's expression turned thoughtful. There's more to suspect about him. More? Yes. He's a Ravenclaw and once a student of Professor Flitwick. I asked Flitwick what he thought of Lockhart when I heard the stories. I thought you would be interested. Do tell. Lockhart was bright when he was a student. Flitwick and other teachers thought he had more natural talent than most. If he had applied himself, he could have been someone remarkable. Instead, he devoted his energy elsewhere. For example, he consistently did poorly in charms while getting acceptable or better marks in other subjects. Flitwick thinks that shows a kind of calculating utilitarianism. The charms professor was the Ravenclaw dean, and Lockhart behaved as if keeping that professor's favor didn't matter to him. In his 5th year, he persuaded a prefect to give up the prefectship to him. In his 7th year, he did the same with the head boy's position. Even now, at the start of this year, Flitwick can't understand why Dumbledore appointed Lockhart to Defense Against the Dark Arts. Hermione looked stunned. Sherlock nodded once. Of course, whatever secrets Lockhart keeps, as long as they don't harm us, I don't much mind. Compared to Quirrell last year, Lockhart actually teaches things that are useful. As Flitwick put it, everybody at Hogwarts keeps their own secrets. Hermione left deep in thought, visibly shaken by what Sherlock had said. Watching her go, Sherlock folded his hands under his chin and fell into another reverie. Time slipped by unnoticed. Harry trudged back to the Gryffindor Tower from Lockhart's office with sore arms and exhausted steps. He had been bent over paper for hours. Seeing only Sherlock in the common room, he burst out, "Sherlock! You're back?" Sherlock checked him over with a quick glance and then looked at Harry. "Judging by your right arm's range of motion, Lockhart's fan base is larger than I expected, but you've returned earlier than I thought." Harry's voice came out thick. "Sherlock, have you been waiting for me?" "Not exactly. I was thinking after Hermione left." Harry decided not to dwell on the silence. "If you're not too tired, I have something important to tell you." "Go on." Harry's eyes brightened and he leaned forward. "I heard a voice in Lockhart's office." "What kind?" Sherlock's attention sharpened. Harry searched for the words. It was a speaking voice, cold, chilling, like it took your breath away. It said, come here, let me tear you apart, kill you." But Lockhart said he didn't hear anything. Harry sounded near hysterical. "He told me I must be sleepy, that I'd been there for 4 hours, but that couldn't be it. I swear I heard it." Sherlock said nothing. He just looked at Harry. "You must tell me everything that happened from the moment you entered Lockhart's office. Be as detailed as you can. Don't leave anything out." When Sherlock said that, Harry immediately sat up straighter. Sherlock only ever used that tone when he was serious, when a real mystery had arrived. Harry began at the beginning, how he'd gone to the office with Hermione, how Lockhart had persuaded Hermione to leave, how Sherlock had suggested questions about dealing with avid fans like Colin Creevey, and how Harry had ended up helping Lockhart answer his mail. Hundreds, maybe 1,000 letters. He'd barely been able to keep writing when he first heard the voice. At first, he thought it was a trick of his tired mind. When he woke suddenly, it was clearer. Lockhart insisted he'd heard nothing, accused Harry of being sleepy, and let him go. Harry hesitated. He had promised Hermione not to tell anyone, but Sherlock wasn't exactly anyone, was he? "So you came back earlier than I expected," Sherlock murmured. "Apart from the sentence you just quoted, you didn't hear any other phrases." "No. What else did Lockhart say?" "He told me to go back and rest right away." "Could you tell what direction the voice came from?" "No." Harry looked apologetic. He knew Sherlock trusted him, but he had no useful clues to offer. Sherlock repeated the words under his breath, almost to savor them. Come here, let me tear you apart, kill you." He made a small, contemptuous sound. Whoever speaks like that sounds adolescent and melodramatic, like a street thief catcher yelling, "Stop!" Then he set himself to reasoning. "Have you ever heard anything like that before?" Harry blinked. He hadn't expected the question. "What?" "My dear Harry," Sherlock said with that famous line of his, "when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. So we must begin. First, rule out your hallucination." Harry nodded violently. "I know it wasn't a hallucination." "Second, assume Professor Lockhart truly heard nothing." "I don't think he was lying. His surprise looked genuine. Very well. If both those things are true, then you heard a sound that no one else could hear. It is very likely a sound produced by some odd creature. Yes, that's it. Harry pumped his fist. You saw it. You understand straight away. Sherlock's expression did not match Harry's excitement. No, incorrect. What? Harry stared at him in disbelief. But you just eliminated those possibilities. Are they truly eliminated? Sherlock smiled thinly. What if I propose other possibilities? For instance, what if you invented it? Sherlock, Harry's anger was immediate. I would never lie to you. He was angry and hurt. How could Sherlock doubt him after everything? He felt betrayed for a moment, almost ready to cry. Sherlock did not meet the emotional flare. He pressed on, gently but relentlessly. My dear Harry, of course I believe you would not lie to me, but what if this was not a conscious action on your part? Harry's confidence crumpled. He understood each word Sherlock said, but strung together they made no sense. He sat there, bewildered. 197. Just bear with it, and you will feel comfortable. My dear Harry, first of all, thank you for your trust in me. Sherlock rose slowly, his robe catching the moonlight that slipped through the common room window. Your honesty is beyond doubt, but remember that human senses are limited. What one sees and hears can be arranged by others, deliberately staged before your eyes and ears. Harry blinked. I don't quite follow. Think back over the cases I've seen. This happens all the time. The people at Scotland Yard think they have the whole picture and grow complacent. They're often just puppets, dancing to the criminal's tune. Sherlock paused, his expression hardening. And we are in the magical world now, where things are far more complicated. You spent nearly 4 hours in Lockhart's office. If he had wanted to do something to you with the tools at his disposal, we might not even have noticed. Don't forget, he's the defense against the dark arts professor. Sherlock's gaze bored into Harry. I don't believe a defense against the dark arts professor wouldn't understand the dark arts. A coldness settled over Harry. Sherlock, He found he had no good reply. The thought that Lockhart might be more dangerous than he appeared made him uneasy. Of course, don't be overly alarmed. From what I observed from the moment you came in until now, you appear perfectly normal. Even if Lockhart did have that sort of ability, he lacks motive. You and he have played the part of amiable colleagues so far. And besides, you have the protection of a powerful maternal love. Seeing how rattled Harry looked, Sherlock allowed himself the barest smile. I only mean to show you that you can't dismiss possibilities so easily. And to sort this out, I will need time, which is why I asked whether you'd heard anything like that sound before. Harry, already unsettled by Sherlock's suggestion, hesitated. I'm not sure. Maybe not. Sorry, Sherlock, I can't remember. Don't brood. Come, have something to drink. Sherlock's smile widened. We'll talk more after a drink. Then we should go to bed. Still uneasy, Harry changed into his pajamas and climbed into bed. The only useful thing he'd taken from Lockhart that day was a way to handle Colin Creevey. Answering Lockhart's endless letters had left his arm numb. Despite his anxieties, Harry fell asleep within minutes. Sherlock listened to the soft rhythm of his breathing and allowed himself a small smile. Harry had begun to hear things others didn't and to see creatures others couldn't. The second year might not be as dull as the first. Magic. How interesting. A month slipped by. October brought a sudden cold through Hogwarts that spared few students or staff. In Sherlock's dormitory, only he and Harry escaped it. Ron, Neville, and Dean lay bundled in their beds. Other houses were much the same, and Madame Poppy Pomfrey was busier than ever. She'd brewed up a reviving potion, really a cure for the common cold, that warmed one through and left the ears tingling for a few hours. Sherlock was playing his violin. The opening passages were a grating, saw-like rasp that made the others wince, but it was familiar. Everyone knew Sherlock's practice began painfully and then became exquisite. True enough, once he'd satisfied himself, the next piece was beautiful, and the 3 brows in the room relaxed. Refreshed, Harry looked over at Ron, who still sounded stuffed up. Ron, you really ought to come with us for morning exercise. You might not catch these colds if you did. You always say, next time for sure, but you never show up. Ron's voice came out muffled. Next time for sure. Honestly, Harry, this time I really mean it. Harry gave him a look that said he didn't believe him at all. Neville, listening, glanced at Sherlock. Sherlock set down his violin and addressed Neville. You can come with us for morning exercise starting tomorrow. Neville froze, then sat bolt upright, staring at Sherlock. Galloping Gorgons! Harry and Ron both turned. Neville, what's wrong? Neville fumbled for words. Sure, Sherlock said what I was thinking, but I didn't say anything. Ron and Harry stared, equally baffled. What on earth is going on, Sherlock? Ron demanded. This is no end of a surprise. Sherlock chuckled. My dear Ron, you'll remember the conversation Hermione and I had about that Edgar Allan Poe story, the one where a man deduces everything someone thin thinks. You said it was just an author's trick, no different from Lockhart's cleverness. I told you then that I have the same habits of deduction, but you didn't take me seriously. Ron waved his hands. I didn't. I wasn't. Don't be daft. You didn't say it with your mouth, Ron, but you did think it. When I saw Neville lost in thought, I took the chance to illustrate it. Sherlock looked at Harry with a gleam. This is where Harry differs from you. He believes my deductions without argument. Harry smiled smugly. Ron and Neville exchanged helpless looks. Sherlock laughed. If you don't believe me, let's make a wager. If my conclusion convinces you, then drink the reviving potion. I'm tired of you lot sniffling and yawning in here. You look like patients going through withdrawal. They traded glances and agreed. Harry, looking pleased, interjected. Sherlock, the example you and Hermione discussed isn't the same as this one. Explain, Sherlock invited. Harry spoke up. The deducer in the story relied on visible actions. His companion tripped over stones or looked at the stars, things like that. But Neville was lying still on his bed. There were no obvious actions to observe. Neville nodded eagerly. Ron fixed Sherlock with a stare that dared him to produce a better explanation. Sherlock's eyes brightened. Neville, Harry is underrating you. Neville? Neville pointed at himself, bewildered. Yes, people betray their thoughts by their faces. Facial expression is their faithful servant. Sherlock turned to Neville. I deduced what you were thinking from your face, especially your eyes. You were lying there, expressionless, and when Harry mentioned morning exercise, you turned to face us. That was the first movement I noticed. Then your gaze dropped to Harry's bedside, where we keep the wooden practice wands for fencing. Your expression shifted. You began to think. A moment later, your eyes moved to Harry's right hand, then to me with the violin, and you hesitated as though you wanted to speak. All of that said, you wanted to join Harry and me for morning fencing practice. No way, Sherlock, you really watched me that closely, Neville blurted. Harry and Ron stared, astonished. How did you see any of that? Ron asked. Sherlock smiled. There were other clues. Recall the day Harry missed morning exercise because of Quidditch practice? When I came back, I found you and Ron fencing with those 2 wooden sticks. You took my correction to heart. Ron nodded and put it down. Neville's expression and actions showed he took it more seriously. From that, I surmised something else. Ron pressed, What something? Neville must have been practicing fencing on his own in the dormitory ever since, right? 198. Don't come over here. Sherlock, I'm truly impressed with you this time, Ron said, his voice muffled with admiration. I have to admit, I did have some doubts about that remark the other day. Just a tiny bit, of course. My dear Ron, that was indeed very shallow. If you hadn't shown any disbelief then, I wouldn't have had the chance to use this to distract you. Sherlock's tone was mildly teasing. Ron flushed, half embarrassed, half helpless. Was Sherlock that intent on proving a point? He'd remembered a casual remark all the way until now just to prove him wrong. Still, it meant Sherlock paid attention. That had to mean something. If it were anyone else, Sherlock wouldn't care. Yes, that must be it. He was about to praise him when Sherlock, as if by some small flourish, produced a little glass bottle from his cloak. So now you should drink this bottle of invigorating potion. I don't want to drink that stuff. Ron's face changed. He shook his head so hard it looked theatrical. I'd rather go for morning exercise with you guys. He'd agreed earlier to Sherlock, but now he intended to be stubborn. No one could force him to take a potion. No matter how persuasive Sherlock was, today he'd sooner starve, sleep outside, or jump off something than swallow a drop. Sherlock merely turned his head and addressed Neville. Neville, huh? If you truly want to learn fencing properly, then you and Harry should force-feed Ron this potion. Ah! Neville sputtered. "And after you've done that, you drink one yourselves," Sherlock added. "Neville, you don't want to drag your cold-ridden body out for a cold morning's exercise with us, do you?" Neville hesitated. Ron stared. He had never expected Sherlock to go this far, to actually force medicine on someone. The usually shy Neville seemed to be stirred by Sherlock's encouragement. Ron immediately tried to avert disaster. Hey, Sherlock, don't be ridiculous." Then he turned to Neville, pleading, "Neville, think carefully." That only made Neville decide faster. Before Ron could react, Neville jumped out of bed and took the bottle from Sherlock's hand. Ron was stunned. Who said Neville was timid? He was suddenly incredibly brave. Ron tried to scramble away, but Harry had him pinned. After training with Sherlock, Harry was no longer scrawny, and Ron, still weak from a cold, couldn't struggle free. "Don't come closer," he shouted. Sherlock flicked his wand. Muffliato. The charm dulled Ron's shouting to a mosquito's whine to everyone else in the corridor. "Don't you come closer," he whined, but it sounded thin and pathetic. Neville smiled. For some reason, he felt a little proud. "Ron, it's time for your medicine." He spoke gently, but his hand was anything but hesitant. He clapped a hand over Ron's mouth and tipped the bottle, pouring the whole potion down his throat. The move was so fast and decisive that even Harry, still holding Ron, was surprised. Sherlock's smile widened with satisfaction. If you wanted to master fencing, you needed guts. The Sorting Hat hadn't put Neville in Gryffindor by mistake. Courage lay deep in him after all. Steam immediately began to rise from under Ron's flaming red hair. His ears steamed as the potion took hold. Harry and Neville let go of him. Sherlock handed a second bottle to Neville, who drank it down without hesitation, and his ears started to steam too. Ron almost burst out laughing. Brave when it mattered, and stubborn with Sherlock. That was why Neville was a Gryffindor, clearly. The potion worked. By evening, both Ron and Neville were much better. After a quick conference, they set their sights on Dean. They meant to do what had been done to Ron to him, but Dean, usually so honest-looking, surprised them both. As Ron and Neville approached with ill intent, the boy silently gulped the potion down. His ears steamed. Ron felt a pang of disappointment. He'd wanted the thrill of making someone take it under duress. Instead, Dean had taken it willingly. Such a wasted opportunity. After that, Sherlock and Harry went to see Hagrid, ostensibly for rock cakes. On the way, Harry reminded Sherlock repeatedly not to mention they wanted the cakes to use as shields. Sherlock, indifferent, nevertheless agreed when Harry asked sincerely. Hagrid didn't pry. When he heard they wanted rock cakes, he handed over a generous supply. Then Hagrid steered them toward the backyard. "Come with me. I've got something good out here." "Good stuff. It's not those cabbage-eating slugs again, is it?" Harry teased. "What slugs? This is much better." "Much better?" "That's right. Come and see." Sherlock followed, a little wary, and then understood Hagrid's meaning right away. Giant pumpkins, huge enough that 2 or 3 people could have sat inside each one. "How's that for impressive? I'm getting them ready for Halloween," Hagrid beamed. Harry's eyes went wide. He'd never seen pumpkins this enormous. "Hagrid, how did you do it? What kind of fertilizer?" "It's not fertilizer," Hagrid began. "The engorgement charm." No, Sherlock interrupted lightly. "You wouldn't do that, would you? I remember your wand got broken." Hagrid's face fell. He quickly hid the pink umbrella he was carrying behind him. Harry exchanged a look with Sherlock. Everyone at Hogwarts had secrets. Hagrid's umbrella was one of them. Seeing Hagrid flustered, Harry hurried to change the subject with a pleading look. "Sherlock, why don't we talk about something else?" "All right," Sherlock said, nodding, and pointed at some birds. "Those roosters seem well kept." "Of course," Hagrid laughed. "Sherlock, you know I'm good at looking after creatures. Funny thing, Ginny came by a few days ago and said I was doing a bang-up job." "Ginny?" Harry asked. "That's right. If you ask me, she wouldn't turn down your autograph." "If you say that again, I won't play with you," Harry threatened, and Hagrid laughed uproariously. With Halloween approaching, the first Quidditch match of the season was near, and Oliver Wood's enthusiasm for regular practice was unstoppable. Rain or shine, he insisted on training. As a result, Harry attended fewer morning exercises. The regular team for Sherlock's morning sessions became Neville, who had recovered from his cold and taken up fencing as promised. Ron kept saying, "Next time for sure." After one morning session, Sherlock looked at Neville with obvious approval. Neville, you really have a talent for fencing. Really? Neville asked, cautious and delighted. I don't lie unless I have to. Sherlock wasn't lying. He hadn't expected Gryffindor to produce two fencing prodigies at once, Harry and Neville. Dumbledore had once mentioned there were two people who met the conditions to be a savior of the wizarding world. Voldemort had chosen Harry, but that didn't mean Neville wasn't also special. Sherlock found his mind forming a bold idea. One Saturday before Halloween, a storm rolled in. Large drops battering the castle windows continued for days. The lake swelled, flower beds turned to mud. Harry came back to the castle drenched and filthy after training, and in a foul mood. It wasn't just the weather. The Weasley twins' reconnaissance had been worrying. With the speed boost of the new Nimbus 2001s, Slytherin's team looked like 7 streaks of light green jetting through the air. Harry found himself regretting, briefly, not being more ruthless in a previous clash with Malfoy. Then he dismissed the thought. What was past, and with Madame Pomfrey, even a broken jaw was only a night in the infirmary. Harry, a pleasant voice called through the empty corridor as he walked. A very beautiful girl with long, glossy black hair stepped into view, smiling at him. 199. A beautiful encounter with Chuzhang. Cho, what are you doing here? Shouldn't I be asking you that? Cho Chang sized Harry up and frowned with genuine concern. Why are you in this state? Did something unlucky happen to you? Harry felt his cheeks heat. Cho Chang, the Ravenclaw seeker, had become a friend over the last term. Their first meeting had been thanks to Sherlock. The previous Easter, Cho's father had given her a 7-color eyeshadow palette that went missing from Ravenclaw, and she'd come to Sherlock for help. Sherlock found the stolen palette, but the outcome wasn't entirely happy. Cho lost a friend in the process. Sherlock had thought that friend not worth keeping. Ravenclaw's wisdom, he'd said, couldn't always overcome the thorns that grew inside people. Cho and the Ravenclaw head girl, Penelope, had come to thank Sherlock, and that's when Harry had first met her. Later, when Harry and Sherlock were hospitalized after stopping Quirrell from taking the Philosopher's Stone, Cho and Penelope had come to visit again. Harry had learned then that Cho was not only beautiful, but easy to talk to, and over the summer they'd kept in touch. By this term, she'd become one of the few close female friends Harry had, second in frequency of contact, only to Sherlock. Right now, Harry wished Cho could see him surrounded by cool friends, laughing at some joke he'd told, instead of standing dripping wet, robes splattered with mud, looking like a drowned rat. Cho burst out laughing at the sight of him, but when she noticed his embarrassment, she softened. It's all right, Harry. We can fix this in no time. She produced her wand and tapped him. Scourgify. Rain and mud vanished, and his scarlet Quidditch robes looked as good as new. Then she cocked her head, waved her wand again, and cast a warming charm. The chill fled, warmth settling back into his bones. Thank you, Cho, Harry said gratefully. Cho felt a little flush under his gaze. You're very welcome. It was nothing. Now, what happened? It was pretty unlucky. Harry sighed and quickly told her about the practice and the Slytherin brooms. They bought Nimbus 2001s for the whole Slytherin team so Malfoy could join. Cho's mouth fell open. They can't do that. That's just despicable. It's despicable, and it's too late to argue about. Harry shook his head. They fly like jets. I feel we're going to lose again. Don't say that, Harry. Cho moved closer, full of easy confidence. My broom is a Comet 260, not a Nimbus 2000 or a 2001, probably even worse than a shooting star. But I still play Quidditch. A broom helps, yes, but it's the player who matters, especially the seeker. Harry looked at her, grateful. Cho, she smiled. And besides, if you give up now, the game's over before it even starts. I believe in you. You should believe in yourself. Harry felt something lift. All right, he straightened. You should go get some rest after this. Cho brightened at successfully cheering him up. Oh, by the way, why do you always pick days like this to train? It's storming. Why not wait for better weather? Our captain never changes the practice schedule for weather, Harry sighed. Fred and George say Wood's enthusiasm for Quidditch wouldn't be dampened even if a forbidden charm fell from the sky. Pfft, Cho laughed again. I've heard head girl Penelope mention Captain Wood, but I've never heard him described like that. Ha! She was even more lovely when she laughed. Harry found he couldn't look away. I actually know a trick that could keep you from ending up like this next time, she added, mischief in her eyes. A waterproof and fireproof charm. Makes whatever it's cast on both waterproof and fireproof. We don't start that in second year, though. Want me to teach you? Please, teach me, Harry answered at once. All right, I'll show you after Halloween. She waved and left with a light laugh. Harry watched her go, fists clenched inside his sleeves. He had to win. For her encouragement today, he had to win. He let himself imagine lessons with Cho after Halloween until a voice behind him interrupted his daydream. You seem very happy, young Mr. Potter. Nearly headless Nick was standing there, wearing a jaunty feathered hat on his curled hair and a doublet with a ruff that did a poor job of hiding his almost detached neck. He looked at Harry with something that might have been melancholy or earnestness. Harry answered politely, Nick, you look troubled. Is something the matter? Rather than a short reply, Nick launched into a long grievance. Do you know my neck was chopped 44 times with a blunt axe? 44 times. Potter, do you know how I survived? And yet they say I'm not fit to join the headless hunt. Why not? You might not know about the headless hunt. Look at this. He pulled a translucent letter from his doublet and read it aloud. Dear Sir Nicholas de Mimsy Porpington, your report on my application to join the headless hunt has been received. Our team has given it careful consideration at a specially convened meeting. After democratic discussion by the captain, deputy captains, and all night team members, we unanimously agree that the headless hunt can only accept hunters whose heads are fully separated from their bodies. Members who are not in this state cannot participate in headless hunt activities such as horseback acrobatics and head-on polo. I regret to inform you that you do not meet our criteria. Thank you for your long-standing support and interest. Yours sincerely, Sir Patrick Delmore. Harry was speechless. Nick paid no heed to his bewilderment and kept pouring out his woes. Somehow, by the end of it, Harry found himself vaguely agreeing to attend Nick's 500th death day party on the eve of All Saints' Day. Maybe it was the buoying effect of Cho's kindness. It wasn't a big deal, he thought. He would go. He made his way back to the Gryffindor Tower and found the dormitory empty, except for Sherlock, stretched out on his bed, chin propped on his hands, staring into space. Sherlock glanced at Harry, then away again. Harry was used to that. He changed out of his wet Quidditch robes and into regular ones, then went to Sherlock's bedside. Sherlock, I ran into nearly headless Nick. He's invited me to his 500th death day on the eve of All Saints. He wants me to bring friends. Do you want to go? 200, dead or alive, no interest. Sherlock lay motionless on the bed and answered lazily. You're not going? Harry was a little surprised by that response. My friend, there ought to be a boundary between the dead and the living, whether in the Muggle world or the magical world. It's just that in the Muggle world, the living can't communicate directly with the dead. Huh, I thought something like this would pique your curiosity. You have a point, but since you've already agreed to go, tell me what you saw and heard when you get back. All right. Slightly surprised but not thinking much of it, Harry stood and walked toward the door. I'll go ask the others. I suppose the reason you agreed to Nick so readily was because you had a pleasant chat when you met Miss Chang, right? Sherlock asked out of the blue. Yes, actually, now that you mention it, I did make a rather hasty decision, Harry blurted. The meaning of Sherlock's words suddenly hit him. He stopped, turned, and stared at his older friend in shock. How did you know? Sherlock finally sat up. Now, my dear Harry, you must admit you're surprised. I am indeed. Harry sank back down, bewildered. He had met Cho Chang before seeing nearly headless Nick. He hadn't intended to hide it from Sherlock, but being exposed before he could even tell him was startling. I should have you write that down and sign your name. Why? Because in 5 minutes, you'll say it's too simple again. I definitely won't say that. You should know me better, my dear Harry. Sherlock pushed himself to his feet and began to pace the dormitory, adopting the same clipped tone Professor McGonagall used when scolding her class. To make a chain of deductions, each depending on the previous, is straightforward. But if I remove all the intermediate steps and announce only the premise and the conclusion, I achieve an effect you find astonishing and exaggerate the result, much like your current expression." He swept his gaze over Harry from head to toe. "When I saw you walk in a clean uniform and wearing a joyful expression, I guessed you'd just met Miss Chang. It's not hard." "Sorry, I really don't see the connection," Harry protested. "On the surface, there isn't one, but there are several small clues." Sherlock listed them precisely. "First, your clothes are unusually dry and free of mud. That contradicts the soaked and muddy state of the other Gryffindor Quidditch players who trained with you half an hour ago. Second, there's a very faint charm residue on your collar, consistent with Scourgify or a similar cleaning charm, which you don't normally use. Third, there's a partially dissipated warming charm on you, again not your usual doing. Fourth, you tend not to hide your emotions. When you came in, you looked different. A touch tired, yes, but with the corners of your mouth lifted and a real light in your eyes. Fifth, your pupils were slightly dilated and your face flushed, a typical physiological response to adrenaline and dopamine. Sixth, there's a faint scent of jasmine about you, which points to a specific person. When all these coincidences converge, the answer becomes as obvious as a completed Rubik's Cube. You met Cho Chang in the corridor, and her kindness and her magic saved you from becoming a mud puddle." "That's too simple," Harry snapped. "See, I knew it would be like this." Sherlock looked mildly offended. "Every problem, once explained to you, becomes very simple." Ahem, Harry felt awkward. He had sworn earlier that Sherlock would never say that, and he had been proven wrong. Since there was no undoing it, he forced a change of subject. "Well, I'm going down to the common room to find Ron and Hermione. Want to come?" "No, just tell them I'm not attending Nearly Headless Nick's birthday party. It's a Death Day party. My friend, a banquet held in a subterranean classroom with a ghost band. In my opinion, there's no meaningful difference." "Oh, all right." Sherlock's pragmatism left Harry speechless. In the Gryffindor common room, he soon found Hermione and Ron and told them about Nearly Headless Nick's 500th Death Day party. "A Death Day party?" Hermione's eyes lit up. "I bet not many living people can say they've attended something like that. It must be marvelous." Hermione's adventurous streak had been roused. Otherwise, she usually came across as the rule-following bookworm. Ron, who had been trying to do potions homework, or rather deciphering Sherlock's homework, looked up, intrigued. "A Death Day party, dancing with ghosts. That sounds brilliant," he said, then hesitated and glanced at Hermione. "But Sherlock isn't going. Are you still coming?" "Of course I'm going," Hermione snapped, half offended. "What does whether he goes have to do with me?" Harry and Ron exchanged a glance and offered a shrug that said a lot without words. Hermione, noticing their expressions, scowled. "What are those looks for?" "Nothing. I'll go ask the others." Seeing the situation was about to turn ugly, Harry slipped away. Ron had to finish his homework, so he forced a smile at Hermione and said, "What you said was spot on. Really insightful." Hermione turned away, annoyed, and Ron seized the chance to return to the potions notes. He was running out of time. Despite being the boy who lived, Harry had no obligation to attend a ghost's Death Day party. After asking around, only Neville and Ginny agreed to come. Neville said it was to repay Harry and Hermione for help in recent lessons. He was also bad at refusing people. Ginny claimed she was going to accompany one of her brothers, but she kept glancing at Harry in a way that made her real reason obvious. Time passed quickly. Halloween Eve arrived, and Harry began to regret his decision. The rest of the school would be at the Hogwarts Halloween feast in the Great Hall. The hall was already decorated with live bats as always, and Hagrid's giant pumpkins had been carved into lanterns big enough for 3 people to sit inside. There were even rumors that Dumbledore had hired a skeleton dance troupe. Compared with last year, the festive atmosphere was stronger. Suddenly, a ghostly dance and a spectral band did not seem like an attractive alternative. What is said cannot be unsaid. Hermione reminded him sternly when she caught Harry hesitating. "You said you'd go to the Death Day party. If you've given your word, you must keep it." Harry looked hopelessly at Sherlock. "Sherlock, are you really not coming with us?" "No need. Given the choice, I'd rather attend a living person's banquet than a dead one's." Hearing that, Harry sighed and glared at him. What a heartless man. Then, just before they left, Sherlock said, I suggest you all bring some food. Harry blinked. Why? An ominous feeling crawled up his spine. Ron, foolishly optimistic, laughed. Sherlock, are you worried the ghosts won't put on a good show? Nearly headless Nick wouldn't be the sort of host to— Ha! Sherlock ignored Ron's laughter and fixed his gaze on Harry. My dear Harry, I told you there should be a boundary between the dead and the living. A ghost banquet is very unlikely to provide food for the living. Then he turned to Ron. And my friend, even if they invite you as a courtesy, based on my understanding of those ghosts, they probably won't think to accommodate you. The color drained from Harry and Ron's faces. Ron's grin froze.